On a chilly night, an assassin named Rayon, who works for the Shadow Group, feels an unshakable sense of dread. He's soon approached by his master, Darius Robert, who commends him for his efforts in improving the state of the house. Out of nowhere, his master asks him if he believes that shadows need freedom. After Rayon gives the usual mechanical response, his master doesn't buy it and asks how he managed to break free from their control. The realization that he's been found out really shocks him, and he doesn't know what to say. The thing is that the house Robert kidnaps or buys young children and binds their minds to make them become assassins and loyal dogs who do their dirty bidding. Somehow, by a stroke of luck, Rayon managed to break free from their control after encountering something during one of his missions. Eventually, he manages to ask his master how he found out, and he's told that all assassins working under the organization are bound with two shackles. The first one is the mind shackle, and the other is something else. A strange pain develops in his chest, and his master informs him that the second shackle is something called a rage worm, which he had implanted inside all of their bodies. The rage worm happens to be an abhorrent curse that can detect even the feelings of its captives, and it begins to eat up Rayon's heart. Angry about how much his master has used him, he calls him disgusting. He receives a nonchalant response as Darius tells him that he's not disgusting but only thorough. The sad part about Rayon's life is that he was too young to remember his life before he was kidnapped. All he's ever really known is being raised as a hunting dog without feelings and emotions, up until the time he became the leader of the Shadows. His only comfort was that he was able to learn the flame link technique, also known as the art of the continent's greatest swordsman, that eventually allowed him to break free of the mind shackles. Based on this discovery, he envisioned a life where he would finally be able to live free of the shadows, but all he seems to have gained is death and not freedom. The worm continues to bore through his heart, and he's unable to answer the gnawing question about the terrible sin he committed to deserve an empty death. Enraged, our guy promises himself that he won't die like a dog, and he will leave a mark on Darius before he dies. He surprises Darius by managing to get up despite the pain and rushing towards him, but he soon gets decapitated since he's no match for his master. Darius, who regards Rayon as a piece of trash who broke his mind shackles, gets hurt by Rayon's frontal attack, and he wonders how the boy was able to hit him despite the pain from the rage worm. It's truly been a long time since someone managed to injure him. He instructs some of the other assassins to get rid of the dead dog and leaves. Rayon's decapitated head starts to reason that it was pointless to have conceived that he could defeat one of the most powerful warriors on the continent. Sudden rage builds up within him as he recalls how his master forcefully dragged him into this life, manipulated him, and ended his progress with mastering the flame links. As the last iota of life drains out of him, the only prayer on his lips is that some being, whether a god or a demon, can grant him mercy and allow him to exact his revenge. As if on cue, a trinket that was around his neck begins to glister, and a strange screen appears to notify him that he's been chosen by a being called Wrath. Unfortunately, before Wrath can descend onto his body dies, and the process is cut short. Sometime later, a young woman plays with her baby, whom she nicknamed Sunshine. Her new baby happens to be Rayon, who seems to have been reincarnated into the family of this woman named Sylvia. Rayon still retains his memories from his days as an assassin. It all seemed quite unbelievable for him, and he had thought it was a dream. But he eventually had to accept that he'd been reincarnated when he realized this is a dream he doesn't seem to be waking up from. In a playful chatter, his mother tries to communicate to him that the lord of the house is yet to return to give him a proper name, but she doesn't know he understands every word she's saying. To Rayon, it's unclear why it's taking him so long since he's been born for about 100 days. It's clear to Rayon that the family he's been born into is one that is rich and prestigious. To him, it's a great advantage to have been born into such a family, because he's going to need all the resources he can get in his revenge against Darius. Because he's not left the building since he's been born, it's unclear to him where he is or what position he has in the family. To make matters worse, he's been unable to master the flame links technique, so exacting revenge against Darius is going to be something to stow away for a while. Shortly after, a maid named Helen bursts into the room and informs Lady Sylvia that the lord of the house has returned. The lady frantically tries to prepare, but it turns out to be too late, as the lord soon walks in through the main door. The man carries a strong aura, and Rayon recognizes him the moment he steps closer. Because Sylvia refers to him as her father, it seems that this is his grandfather. From his facial features, it's clear to Rayon that this is no other person than Glenn Sieghart, the Northern Lord of Destruction, the head of the continent's apex. He seems to have been reincarnated into the most powerful family in the country. Eventually, Lord Glenn names the baby Rayon, the same name from his past, and tells him to live quietly as if he doesn't exist. Later that night, Rayon, who has been unable to practice for a long time due to unexpected attacks by sleep and having to play with Sylvia, is ecstatic when he finally gets some alone time at night to cultivate his flame links. Most standard cultivation techniques on the continent require one to inhale mana from nature and accumulate the aura in one's core. Meanwhile, the flame links work in a different manner that creates circular links around one's heart and increases stamina, focus, and mana affinity, making it the most ideal cultivation technique for warriors. It also has the added advantage of being able to go undetected by transcendents like Darius. All that's left for him is to increase his strength and focus with the flame links and learn the Siegheart Swords technique. This will make his plan to avenge himself against Darius foolproof. There's just one tiny issue, which is that the mana circuits in his new body are filled with a destructive chill. After confirming that about 9 circuits are blocked, it's clear that he'll soon be dead at this rate. His only option is to find a way to break through the blocked circuits using the flame links. After cultivating for a long time, our boy becomes fuzzy and soon collapses on the bed, losing in a pointless fight against sleep. He's in great luck because he gave in to sleep, as Lord Glenn soon enters the room to check on the sleeping baby and releases some of his aura over him. The next morning, our boy resumes some baby duties. He's always tasked with the heavy-duty job of crawling a bit longer every day to impress his mother, and it's quite frustrating for him to pretend to be a baby when he's a full-grown man on the inside. The poor guy would rather suffer through the destructive chills than spend another minute being babied around. Not long after, Lady Sylvia receives an august visitor, a family friend whom Rayon recognizes as the Ragged Saint. From Rayon's memory, the saint's divine power and knowledge of medicine are said to be beyond mortal comprehension, and he's popularly referred to as the most renowned healer on the continent. After they share their pleasantries, the Ragged Saint warmly informs Sylvia that he came to check on her when he heard she had a child. He comments that the baby looks just like her, and he has cute features that are the total opposite of his grumpy grandpa. When the saint learns that Lord Glenn had named the baby Rayon, which means shadow, he becomes disgruntled and wonders what came over the man. From his tone of voice, it's clear that there's a level of informality between Lord Glenn and the Ragged Saint, and this confirms old rumors that Rayon heard about both men's friendship. After checking Rayon's health, the Ragged Saint discloses to Sylvia that the child has a condition called the Curse of Bitter Frost. Apparently, his mana circuits are blocked by a chill, and it'll be unlikely for him to become a swordsman. He may also not live much longer if he's left untreated. Shocked, Sylvia refuses to believe the saint's words. He simply ignores her protest and promises to bring some medicine for the child. A maid soon enters the room and informs the Ragged Saint that the Lord would like to speak with him. After the saint leaves, Rayon is relieved that he's been able to find out the name of his condition. He starts to plan how he intends to tackle it, but he's taken aback by a tear that falls from his mother's face and onto his own. When he looks up, he finds his mother weeping, and she protests that this cannot be true. Eventually, she builds some gusto and tells the baby that she refuses to let him die like this. For the first time in many years, Rayon feels an odd sensation in his heart that he hasn't felt before. As he wonders what's come over him, he soon realizes that he's feeling unhappy because he doesn't want to see Sylvia crying. In a bid to communicate his sympathy, he extends his hand to wipe her tears and calls her mama for the first time. That finally broke the camel's back, and Lady Sylvia soon forces her way into the room where the Lord and the Saint are speaking, despite the maid's protest. Her abrupt entry angers the Lord, but she bows down to beg him to save Rayon's life. For a short while, Sylvia continues her plea before Lord Glenn, but all she gets is a cold statement that it's pointless to save a little boy who would do no good for the house since he can't become a warrior. When Sylvia reminds him that the boy in question is his grandson, he stands by his previous point and orders the guards to cart her away. After the guards drag her out, the Ragged Saint calls the Lord a stubborn fool. The saint later reveals that the Lord had been harsh to his daughter, even though he had summoned him to the palace after spotting this same issue when he saw the boy. Lord Glenn refuses to give him an answer and asks him to proceed with his report. The saint explains that the boy's mana circuits are blocked and that it'll be dangerous if he's left to grow in such a state. Although Rayon will be temporarily fine since Lord Glenn managed to push back some of the chill using his aura the night he entered his room, it still can't improve his chances of becoming a warrior. In an odd turn of events, the Lord says this doesn't matter as long as the boy survives. He's soon taunted by the saint, who accuses him of putting up a harsh exterior to cover up his great love for his grandson. When the saint asks Lord Glenn why he chose a name that meant shadow of all names, Glenn tells him that the name used to mean the exact opposite many years ago. Days later, Sylvia feeds Rayon some of the elixir that the Ragged Saint had dropped off to help his health. Our boy is glad that he's getting a fire-based elixir because it'll help him push back the chill in his mana circuits. More years pass, and Rayon becomes 5 years old. A system notification soon alerts him that he has completed his second flame link, resulting in an increase in the rank of his soul, his mana affinity, focus, and stamina. The news is like music to his ears, and he suspects that his quick progress might be because of the system's messages he's been receiving. The system is one that only he can see, and it first popped up shortly after he was born, allowing him to check his current status at a glance. His only issue seems to be that there hasn't been much change to his poor stamina or the curse, even though he's attained his second link. He's only been able to get this far because of the elixir and the endless love of his mother and their maid, Helen. There's also the issue that he seems not to be moving along quickly enough, but he realizes he's just 5 years old and has enough time to prepare. He happened to be the greatest assassin in his past life, and now, with the great flame cultivation technique, he should be able to overshadow his flaws with no problem, especially once he masters the Sieghart style of swordsmanship. He realizes that patience is his strongest weapon to kill Darius, one of the strongest of the continent's transcendents, and it won't be a wise bargain to lose himself to revenge. Soon after, his mother comes to give him a change of clothing because they have a special place to go that day. That's the day of the discernment ceremony. To explain that, you have to understand that the forces that maintain the balance of the continents are divided into 6 lords and 5 demons. Rayon happens to have been reincarnated into the house of one of those 6 lords. The 6 lords maintain a positive influence on the continent, while the demons threaten its peace. The purpose of the discernment ceremony is to separate the jewels from the rocks, and today is House Sieghart's ceremony. Upon reaching the venue, the people in the hall look at Sylvia and her son with contempt on their faces. They say very terrible things about her and Rayon's health, even going as far as calling her a failure. Some of them protest that it's unfair for the child of a failure to be let into the discernment ceremony, but Sylvia walks forward and ignores them. Meanwhile, Rayon is affected by their words, but his mother tells him to just focus on her. Moments later, the Lord arrives, and this is the first time Rayon is seeing him after 5 years. When he takes his seat, a huge sword known as the Sword of Discernment drops into the middle of the chambers, and the Lord instructs them to begin the ceremony. The Discernment Sword is a special sword that can identify the full mana potential of anyone who rests their hands on it. One kid from the Sieghart family named Warren is called forward first. The discernment ceremonies are done on young children because the sutures at the top of children's skulls begin to close at age 4, and that's when their mana potential is sealed. The entire point of the ceremony is to discover the exact potential of children in the family line. After Warren places his hands on the sword, the people around praise him because the light that emanates from the sword pours from every inch of it and is of the finest quality, which they say is expected of Lord Karen's son. Next up, another kid named Runan Slorn of the vassal house of Sleorn is summoned. The thing is that the purity of the mana is how much light the sword gives off, and the element the mana is most suitable with also appears. When Runan does her own test, she's also praised as a prodigy because of her bright results, and the people say it's expected from a Slorn. To Rayon, it's clear that the crowd is obsessed with results, but he figures that his results won't be good since his mana circuits are still chilled, even though he's been able to attain his second flame link. When Rayon is called out, several people turn to him with disdainful glares while he steps outside with his mother. Once they reach the sword, Rayon decides that it's not wise to have high expectations, but all that's necessary is to find out what element would be good to train with going forward. When Rayon places his hand on the sword, a strange fire erupts out of it that enchants him. Suddenly he begins to see visions of several heinous monsters, and sees a young warrior in their midst. He watches with deep focus, still confused as to what the vision means, as he watches the monsters in his vision tower over the young warrior. Suddenly the warrior raises a sword covered with fire and hits it on the ground. The resulting explosion from that one move covers the entire radius and obliterates everything in sight. After that occurrence, Rayon returns to normal and he sees the element displayed on the sword. For some reason, the sword displays something else than what he had seen in his vision. A bright light comes off the sword, but it doesn't even reach the middle, and the folks make fun of how little his light is, but Lord Glenn just watches in silence. Sylvia, trying to be a good mother, assures Rayon that he did well, and they head back to their seats. Meanwhile, the people laugh within themselves about how a descendant of House Sieghart would express such a low level. They also make fun of Sylvia, saying the only thing she passed on to her son seems to be his blonde hair and crimson eyes. Soon after, Lord Glenn tells the crowd to stop their yapping, and he asks them why they're making so much of a commotion inside the chambers. Once they keep quiet, the Lord proclaims that the ceremony is over. When the people leave, Lord Glenn and his personal butler are left alone in the chamber with the Sword of Discernment. To Lord Glenn, it seems that Rayon's situation can't be helped. Suddenly, a bright fire erupts out of the sword and catches Lord Glenn's attention. The fire encircles the sword and reaches its peak, which is unlike all they saw during the ceremony. Lord Glenn watches in enthrallment and notices the light is as golden as the sun. From a nearby record, he confirms that the only time that such a light has ever developed is during the ceremony of the founder of House Sieghart, where a transcendental aura fierce enough to melt the flames of the demon realm erupted. Apparently, such a gold-colored mana has only appeared once in the history of House Sieghart, so it's shocking that it's appearing now. After watching the blindingly beautiful light for a short while, the Lord realizes that Rayon is responsible for this, but it doesn't make any sense to him. 7 years after the discernment ceremony, Rayon's stats are displayed on the system window. He still has the curse, terrible stamina, poor athletic ability, and poor mana affinity, but he seems to have worked up some water resistance, which reduces the stiffness in his hands and feet. It seems as if he's quite close to completing his 3rd flame link as well, and he's presently 12 years old. Sometime later, his mother reminds him that they're supposed to go to the next discernment ceremony being held that day. From his past experience, our boy isn't very excited to go because he realizes he'll have to deal with those annoyances once again. Shortly after reaching there, the discernment ceremony for the new set of children is completed. To Rayon, this year's ceremony seems much faster than usual. Before it ends, Rayon is called upon by the Lord, who asks why he hasn't answered the summons to attend basic training as a member of the house after receiving it for a month. Clearly, Rayon knows nothing about any basic training, so his mother answers on his behalf. Apparently, she had gotten the summons and had not informed him. She pleads with the Lord that Rayon isn't like other children and will experience too much strain to complete the training because of the frost in his body. Her plea falls on deaf ears, as the Lord insists that they're on Sieghart land, and there are no exceptions to those who bear the name, nor a right to refuse. From Lord Glenn's perspective, even those who cannot walk should crawl to their training because that's the Sieghart way. Shocked by his words, the lady expresses that she cannot accept those terms, and the Lord asks if she intends to leave the house as she did the last time. He states that they have to abide by Sieghart rules to stay on Sieghart land, otherwise they can leave. Like a cat to a fish, the talks of Sylvia leaving once more become the muse of the onlookers, who begin to chatter among themselves about how she left the house. As usual, Rayon isn't pleased to see his mother bashed. From their murmuring, it's now clear why they hate her so much. It's because she left the house. She didn't just leave the house. She destroyed her core and mana circuits even though she had learned the Sieghart swordsmanship, and that's why she has no aura. She did all of this to marry the man of her dreams, but he died shortly after she became pregnant with Rayon. After that loss, she had no choice but to return to the house. Upon her arrival, the family regarded her terribly because she had tossed away her place in the main family. Regardless of all this, Rayon is certain that he can't join them in putting her down because he's her son and can't stand her being treated this way. All of a sudden, the young boy steps forward to have a word with the Lord, despite his mother's protest. He informs the Lord that he's willing to join the training next month, just as commanded. His submission is met with a rebuttal from one Denier Sieghart, the head of the Palace of Elders, who's sitting nearby. Denier protests that he hadn't known about this before now, and Rayon shouldn't consider basic training as something easy just because of its name. Rayon insists, and even goes as far as saying he will participate in the training to live up to the Sieghart name. That's the part the Lord doesn't like because the Sieghart name carries serious weight. Lord Glenn releases a strong aura toward him, enough to crush his bones, causing blood to come out of his mouth. It's clear to Rayon that this crippling pressure is even stronger than that of his old master, Darius, and he balls up his fist in pain to withstand the pressure. When he eventually collapses, his mother and maid, Helen, come to his rescue. Denier, as well, pleads with the Lord to draw back his spiritual force, saying Rayon is just a child who doesn't know the weight of his words. None of their pleas reach the Lord's ears, and he tells them to let him speak. Sylvia continues to plead, explaining that her son isn't in any state to receive training, and begs him to draw back his aura. Rayon, who remains clasped in his mother's embrace, recalls how he lived in darkness in his past life as an assassin. He was always concealed in the shadows, never revealing his presence. A deep sense of frustration causes him to break free of his mother's embrace in hopes of carving out a better life for himself in this new life. One other motivation he has is his deep desire to restore Sylvia to her original place in the family. Once again, he steps toward the Lord and confesses his ignorance about the Sieghart name, especially since he grew up in the annex and not the main house. He declares that his plan is to participate in the training and find out exactly what kind of place this is. A deep sense of responsibility towards Sylvia, Helen, and all the other people in the annex who have helped him calls on him as he makes his defense before the Lord. Intrigued, the Lord asks him if he intends to judge the quality of the Sieghart name solely through their basic training. Rayon affirms that this seems to be the only way available to him. In response, Lord Glenn promises to order the instructor to prepare his best so Rayon isn't disappointed. The weight of the Lord's aura overshadows Rayon again, and he staggers to the ground. All that's on his mind is how he can combine his experience from his past life as the greatest assassin, along with the power of the flame rings, to stand tall in this house. Even in his fallen state, he swears that he'll prove to them all that the pebble they scorned can become more resilient than they could ever imagine. Meanwhile, at one of the training centers, Karun Sieghart, the head of the Palace of Warriors, speaks with a guard about the seemingly wrong information he got that Raon was an invalid who's practically incapacitated. The guard reaffirms the information by saying that multiple maids in the annex overheard the conversation between the Ragged Saint and Lord Sieghart, and are certain the boy is suffering from a serious illness. To Karun, it was clear that the boy wasn't in stable condition when he saw him, but none of this explains how he was able to withstand the Lord's aura during the discernment ceremony just held. One thing he considers is that Sylvia's potential was truly above the rest, which could explain her son's abilities. In conclusion, Karun asks the guard to order the maids to slip someone into the annex so he can monitor everything that happens there. Meanwhile, Raon overworks himself as usual, and his mother reminds him that she had warned him about this. Sometime later, the 5th Sieghart training grounds welcome Lord Glenn, who has come to speak with the instructor in charge, Lemaire, whom he finds pretending to be asleep. After he forces him up, the duo quibbles back and forth because they're old-time friends. Lord Glenn accuses Lemaire of not having matured a bit after 50 years, and in truth he hasn't, because he's an elf and doesn't age like humans do. Lemaire suspects that the Lord is here to speak to him about his grandchild, and bluntly states that his mother had also been there moments ago. And he doesn't plan to reduce the training regiment for the boy one bit since Lord Glenn had given him absolute control here. Much to his surprise, the Lord didn't come to plead for his grandchild, but only to ask him to maintain or increase the standard as he sees fit to weed out those who aren't worthy of the training. In Lemaire's mind, Lord Glenn would only be doing this because he loves his grandson deeply and is trying to convey the love he was never able to show Sylvia to him. In response, Lord Glenn states that he would have had him decapitated if it wasn't that they were comrades in arms. After a fruitful chat, Lord Glenn leaves the training ground, leaving Lemaire curious as to what all the fuss about this Raon is. Meanwhile, Raon has managed to complete his 3rd flame link, improving his body and soul rank, his constitution and dexterity, his mana affinity, focus, stamina, and increasing his water resistance to 3 stars. Another added advantage is that one strand of the Curse of Frost has disappeared. The message gladdens him, and it's clear that he was able to do this by working hard but not overworking himself, which his mother has helped him ensure. The magical status window also seems to be helping him speed up his growth. All of this is still not as intense as what he's going to go through at the Sieghart training, and even this 3-star flame link can only serve as a solid foundation on which he can build a house. His plan is to display such outstanding accomplishments that all those who mocked him will be permanently silenced, and then take out Darius Robert, his arch-nemesis. While in deep thought, his mother comes to speak with him late at night since he'll be leaving the next day for the basic training. She asks him if he truly has to go because she's afraid he'll keep pushing himself even when he's in pain, until he gets seriously injured during the training. Her suggestion is that he waits for just 1 more year, but Raon says that he can't. His reasons are that he can't bear seeing the members of the main and branch families look at her with contempt and treat those who stay at the annex poorly, and he believes he can end it if he does well at the training. His mother is truly touched by his words and surprised that he has such an extent of thoughtfulness about their present situation. To explain why they're being treated this way, she tells him about how she fell in love with his father by chance on a mission, but it was difficult to be with him because he was an ordinary knight. To chase love, she had to destroy her core and mana circuits and she left the family. It turns out that Raon had an older sister named Sia. While leaving a peaceful life with her husband, a group named the Cadre of Eden recognized Sylvia and caught them by surprise. Since she was pregnant and their father wasn't so strong, there was nothing they could do. She watched her family murdered right in front of her eyes before she was saved by a secret team that her father had dispatched for her protection. The team couldn't get to them early enough because of the distance, but her husband and daughter had already been killed when they got there. Because it was unsafe to remain alone, she had no choice but to return home, and that's how she became the scapegoat of the Sieghart house. When she returned, there was no excuse to give to her father. When she ends her story, all that Raon can discern from the story is that she was selfish enough to throw away her responsibilities to the family for her own happiness, only to return in order to save her life. It's clear to him why the Siegharts treat her the way they do, but to him, she's the woman who gave him life and the first person to show him love. Across 2 lifetimes, this is the first mother he's had, so he realizes he can't afford to treat her like everyone else. Out of nowhere, he asks if she regrets her decision to leave the house, and she says she doesn't. Apparently, she spent her life as a Sieghart feeling invisible, and it was only after she left that she felt like a person, and that was enough. She expresses that she was happy after she left, and she is happy to have him now. She says her only regret is that she's not a good enough mother for him, and Raon assures her that it's fine because she doesn't have to worry anymore. Suddenly, Sylvia begins to weep profusely, and Raon has to comfort her, confused about why she's crying. After he successfully calms her down, He returns to his room to inspect the state of his flamelinks before leaving for the basic training the next day. While he's inspecting the flamelinks, a strange phantom being appears in his room. The being declares that it's finally time and announces that he came once a boiling rage reached them. Apparently, the being's name is Wrath, and it's the second ruler of the demon world, who has come to complete his revenge upon detecting a strong amount of rage. As the being states its terms and conditions, requiring Rayon to sacrifice his body and soul, it's startled to learn that he was summoned by a kid. Rayon is just as surprised, and the both of them begin to question one another about who's who. Wrath is certain that a little kid couldn't have released the amount of rage that summoned him here, but soon changes his mind upon closer investigation. Wrath accepts the kid and demands that he submit his soul as payment to get his revenge executed. To Wrath's surprise, Rayon rejects his help, stating that he plans to carry out his revenge with his own two hands since he plans to enjoy taking Darius's head himself. The being switches up its tone and declares that Rayon seems to be mistaken that this is a negotiation. Apparently, they from the demon world have made their decision, and Wrath is going to take what he wants. In a frenzy, the being surrounds him with a cold fire and rushes toward him like a maniac. Trying to forcefully invade Rayon's body, the impact of the being's intrusion causes our boy's body and mind to start to freeze over. As an incentive, the spirit informs him that they can obliterate any foes he has, even if it's a god, once he accepts them and allows their rage to bubble on the inside. Due to Rayon's increased water resistance, he's able to withstand the chill to a degree, but the being happens to be attacking with more than cold. It seems to be increasing his rage from the inside. The spirit continues to taunt Rayon by telling him they'll crush the head and devour the flesh of his enemies once he surrenders his body to them, but Rayon seems unsure that he can ensure the safety of Sylvia or the maids if he allows such a being inside of him. The being eventually grows impatient and states that they were trying to reduce the damage to his body since they'll be making use of it, but are now tired of playing the game, so they'll simply devour him. The weight of the increased pressure makes Rayon feel like he's going to shatter into 1,000,000 pieces, and his body begins to reach its limits. Before he breaks down, he has a brilliant idea about reducing the burden on his body and mind using the flame links since the water resistance has helped him fight off the chill so far. Since this seems to be the only way he can survive, our boy activates his fire link, and bright light bursts out of his body and shocks the spirit. It becomes angrier than a mere human child can dare withstand their pressure, and Rayon repeats that he will complete his revenge himself because he won't give over his body to some specter. Wrath becomes livid when he overhears our boy calling him a specter, and he demands to know why he would dare disrespect a ruler of the demon world. Rayon snickers that he's not so much of a demon world since he can't defeat him and further infuriates the being. Upon further consideration, it seems that Wrath can't express his full strength since he just woke up, just as he had said. Suddenly the screen shows up and informs Rayon that a new skill has been unlocked, which he knows nothing about. The appearance of the system windows further infuriates Wrath, who claims that the system window is his power and invention. Rayon asks the being if the message and status windows have anything to do with him, and it states that they created the system. Rayon tries to poke further to know why the system was created, but Wrath doesn't give up any information. The being eventually overshares when Rayon asks if the system was made to speed up growth, and Rayon senses that the spirit can't hide its emotions, as expected of one named Wrath. Apparently, the effects of the flame links are now stronger than in Rayon's previous life, because that's exactly what it was made to do: speed up growth. When Wrath demands that he either hands over his body or gives the system back, Rayon tries to hit him with a mana-packed punch, but even that doesn't work. When Wrath notices that it's going to be futile to subdue the boy, he wraps himself around his hand and transforms into a bracelet. He does this because it hasn't been long since the seal was broken and his true power hasn't returned. His plan is to wait patiently until his power returns so he can take his rightful position. Rayon considers taking off the bracelet, but it doesn't seem to be a good idea because it can cause the system to disappear or leave the spirit to harm Sylvia or Helen. To him, it seems like a much better idea to keep the spirit close by so he can keep him under control as he grows. Rayon also asks Wrath why he would transform into a flowery bracelet of all things, and Wrath insists that it's his preference, and Rayon has to respect that. The next day, Lady Sylvia feels tense about Rayon leaving the house, and Helen comforts her. When Rayon steps out, ready to leave, a look of gloom is evident on the women's faces. Before leaving, Helen reminds Rayon not to overexert himself, and he promises to be careful. After sulking for a little while, Sylvia finally asks Rayon to do his best and sends him on his merry way. When he leaves, Sylvia seeks some assurance from Helen that her baby will be fine, and the maid reminds her that Rayon's health has improved greatly, and he just might complete the training in full. Her words serve as comfort to Sylvia, who had profusely wept while they were inside as Rayon promised her that he wouldn't overwork himself or let himself get hurt. Shortly after, Several children gather at the entrance of the 5th training ground and chat with one another. Meanwhile, Rayon stays on his own and considers how not only members of the main and branch families are on the training ground, but also vassal families and outsiders who received recommendations. Not long after, some boys gossip about Rayon's tiny limbs and jokingly wonder why he doesn't just run away from the training. They even joke about the flowery bracelet he's wearing, and Wrath becomes infuriated. The spirit begins to rain curses on the boys, but they're in luck because they can't see him at all. Once he overhears their bickering, Rayon walks up to them and asks why they don't say it to his face instead of whining like mosquitoes. They're surprised, but they immediately become defensive, questioning why a child from the branch family who got locked in the annex would speak to them that way. The funny part is that they're also from the branch family, so it's unclear how they'd have the nerve to ask why he dares speak to them. When he points out that you only speak to people who are lower than you in such a way, the boys are further infuriated, and one of them grabs Rayon's shirt, reminding him to know his place. A maniacal look crosses Rayon's face, and he starts to crack his knuckles, only for one other kid from the main family to stop them. The boy turns out to be Warren Sieghart, the prodigy who had been tested before Rayon in his first discernment ceremony. Warren chastises the boys for their rash behavior and asks them if they plan to make a fool of the family in front of outsiders who were invited. The boys promptly retrace their steps and apologize to Warren. To continue from where they left off, Warren walks up to Rayon and asks him if he still doesn't know his place. He proudly states that Rayon is just dust that he can easily brush away whenever he sees fit, and he warns Rayon to keep his head down if he doesn't want to get chased out of the annex as well. In Warren's mind, Rayon is only here in the training grounds because he was able to take advantage of the situation while in the discernment chambers, and not because he has any real skills. To him, he's merely a failure who's just waiting to get kicked out of the training. As the boys walk away, Warren tells Rayon to get lost if he has no plans to participate in the training, since there's no assurance that he'll pass anyway. Before he can move away, Rayon retorts that Warren should have put more enthusiasm into all the crap he just spilled. He reminds him that being a member of the main family doesn't make him important since he has no rank, he's not a trainee, and he has no authority to do anything to him. He jokes that his only chance is to go complain to his father, and Warren becomes red in the face. He can only respond with the usual, "How dare you?" before Instructor Lemaire breaks the door open and begins to address the students. Lemaire finds it amusing that the boys are already fighting before the fight officially begins. Rayon, who didn't know who the instructor would be, recognizes him as the Sword of Light, who had retired after his core got damaged. Lemaire scatters the boys and tells them to wait until after the admission ceremony to fight. At the ceremony, Lemaire introduces himself to the boys. Apparently, there are 160 people attending this training, and that's a large number to him, so he tells them that he'll trim down the number to just a quarter with a test. The kids are scared stiff that so many of them will be thrown out on just their first day. Lemaire informs them that his word is law on these grounds and offers that they can take their complaints to the head of the house. Shortly after, the test of stamina and focus starts, and the kids begin to run on a track. The instruction is for them to run at full speed until Lemaire tells them to stop. Wrath interrupts again, wondering why Rayon is staying at the end of the race instead of moving forward. In Rayon's mind, this isn't a competition, so there's no need to be faster than the others, especially since their instructor must be observing resilience and temperament rather than surface things. He's certain that the last man standing will be the victor of this test, and he's going to make it to the end. The secondary instructors notice that the two people in the forefront are Warren and Runan, who they're sure will have terrific futures if they're already this good at a young age. When they spot the infamous Rayon, they also notice he can't seem to keep up, but they consider that it's impressive for someone who's sick. The instructors predict that Rayon will fall out soon, but Lemaire just watches keenly. In Lemaire's mind, he's never quite seen a kid like Rayon. So far, he's been unable to access the qualities of the continent's most powerful humans because their depths were beyond his understanding. But he can see the threads and colors of what kind of people the other children will become. The only issue is that he can't seem to see any color for Rayon. The only time such a thing happens is when the person's potentials are stronger than his range of understanding. The boys who taunted Rayon before look back at him, and they joke that he's not going to last another 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Rayon is surprised that all they're doing is running when this is supposed to be training. In his past life, they set starving beasts loose to chase them, and they had to run for their lives, which makes what they're doing here pretty vanilla. Some time passes as the kids continue their running. Lemaire is surprised that Rayon is still running, even after his stamina hit bottom a long time ago. It's clear that this is more than just determination, because the kid is obviously wrung dry. This level of focus, Lemaire reasons, is only possessed by those who have endured torment and faced death over and over. The story keeps getting more interesting, and Lemaire keeps getting interested. On the track, Warren notices that Rayon is still running hot behind him, and he wonders how that's even possible since the boy is sick. Apparently, he had eavesdropped on the meeting between his father and the guard, where he confirmed that the boy is indeed sick. Annoyed, Warren decides to use aura to improve his speed and show the rest of them that they're not the same. He soon races forward, leaving Runan and Rayon, who seem to be the only two other people still running, behind. To Rain, Warren seems pretty immature compared to Runan, who has a more calm demeanor. He decides not to try to outrun anyone so he doesn't mess up his pace, especially since it's not a competition. The other students are seen to have fallen by the side. Some of them wonder who the heck Rayon is, and some of them are jealous since they've heard that he's a sick kid. Rayon overhears one of the kids asking if he doesn't get tired. He almost laughs from inside because the chills in his body make him feel like he's about to die, and his heart and lungs might collapse at any moment. The only way he's been able to stand the chill is because he's been able to use the flame links to squeeze out some stamina. When Wrath detects Rayon's fatigue from the chills, he tries to take advantage of the situation and demands that he surrender his body to him so he can surpass the little runt, referring to Warren. With the maniacal smile on the spirit's face, Rayon realizes that he's about to get into trouble, and this is true as Wrath hits him with another cold attack. The attack hits hard, and Rayon begins to feel hazy, but he has to pretend like nothing is going wrong. Wrath is certain that no human can withstand this level of power, but Rayon struggles to hold on because he knows the spirit will devour him if he shows any sign of weakness. Eventually, nothing happens and Rayon keeps running. Wrath becomes enraged and wonders why their rage isn't working on the little boy. Meanwhile, our boy, who feels like he is about to die because he can't even control his body, his failing vision, and his breath, is nearing his limit. Just as he's about to hit his limit, the voice of the instructor pierces through the air and stops the exercise. After they stop, Warren holds Rayon in contempt for not giving up till the end, but Runan just watches him with interest. Meanwhile, Wrath still finds it hard to understand how Rayon was able to handle the onslaught of cold, but Rayon reminds him he told him not to waste his time training. Instead of stopping him, Wrath's attack actually helped his flame links grow stronger since it allowed him to exert his body much more. Suddenly, a screen appears and notifies Rayon that he has met the condition of intense movement that surpasses his current constitution. Because of this, his strength, dexterity, and constitution increase a bit, which only further infuriates Wrath. After the kids gather together, Lemaire commends everyone for their hard work and informs them that he lied about reducing their number to just a quarter of the initial. He says it wouldn't make sense to fail that many of them on the first day, and he hadn't said this would be the test that most of them would flunk. However, he states that if they all treat their training the way they did today, most of them will certainly fail, especially since he told them to go at full speed and none of them ran at full speed until the end, except Warren, who sneakily used aura. Lemaire reminds them to take things seriously by following his instructions so they don't fail, though it won't be easy. From that point on, they all became temporary trainees, up until the exam they have in 6 months, when they will no longer be temporary if they pass. At the end of 6 months, Lemaire is also going to choose a valedictorian from among them. Later on, Lemaire heads into the nearby woods to nap on a boulder, only to find Lord Glenn there. Lord Glenn asks how the test went, and he's told that Warren and Runan have great potential as expected, and the other children are more than capable of becoming future pillars for House Sieghart. The only issue seems to be the fact that Lemaire can't seem to see anything when it comes to Rayon's case. Lemaire recounts how the boy ran all the way to the end even though he was out of stamina, and he confesses that this is the second time this has happened, the first being Master Glenn. For Lemaire, the developing situation seems to be a source of entertainment since he's been so bored after his core got shredded. As the Lord leaves, Lemaire says that it seems like someone who he can entrust his future to will come out of this batch of trainees. Lord Glenn, on the other hand, insists that it must be a coincidence and the child is incapable of becoming a swordsman, but Lemaire doesn't buy that. Meanwhile, Rayon decides to go to the center's training room right after they just finished such rigorous training, catching the attention of some boys who overhear him. Once he leaves, the boys argue amongst one another about how Rayon must have been using a trick to last so long during the run because it's confirmed that he's sick. One of them, who's from a branch family, Crane Seagrat, shares with them that he heard a rumor that the elder gave our boy an elixir, and that must be what he used. The boys become angry that Rayon got the upper hand over them because he used an elixir, so they decide to teach the smug brat a little lesson. Moments later, they suddenly throw Rayon against a tree, but he doesn't seem to know why they've suddenly come to attack him. The boys let him know they're angry that a boy who got kicked out of the main family has the nerve to be smug after using an elixir to run. The kids begin to crack their knuckles, saying they just want to have a conversation with him. As usual, Wrath is angry that he would put up with such treatment and seeks to crack the boys' heads open. While the words are still in Wrath's mouth, Rayon, who is a maniac on the inside, enjoys it as he beats up all 3 boys and leaves them in a terrible state. The sight of the boys getting beaten is so beautiful that Wrath almost begins to blush. After the boys are on the ground begging for mercy, Rayon asks if Warren had set them up to do this. He's told that Warren has nothing to do with this, which he struggles to believe because he's certain that Warren hates his guts. Once he confirms this, he threatens the boys that something worse can happen to them if anyone knows about their little conversation or they ever approach him again. The boys scurry off in fear, glad that they didn't die in the process. Meanwhile, Lemaire, who had been watching from behind a tree, enjoys the show, and he feels as if he was watching the young Master Glenn once again. This reinforces his suspicion that Rayon is an unknown potential hidden among the greatest potentials. When he gets back home, the system notifies Rayon that he's met another condition by satisfying Wrath with his actions, and his dexterity has increased by 1. As usual, this just makes Wrath go crazy that he'd get additional points just for pleasing him, and he protests that the system is nonsense. When Rayon reminds him that he made the system, Wrath angrily replies that this is new to him because he's never had his system stolen before. After Wrath starts to curse and notices that Rayon isn't paying him any attention, he decides to make him an offer. The offer is a choice to get additional points for his stats by winning or accept some of his rage by losing, and all he has to do is ensure he ranks first in the trainee exam like Lemaire had proposed. After Rayon notices that he can also get a random attribute by winning, Wrath explains that he'll get one of their attributes, whose rank will be adjusted to match his weak body. He's also informed that the wrath he'll gain by losing is a tiny amount of rage carried by the spirit, which will only be a tiny amount but can grow into an uncontrollable amount sometime in the future. Because the spirit states all the terms up front, Rayon realizes he's not lying and considers that the rewards far outweigh the risk. It's clearly a poisoned apple, but it's clear that his experience from his past is enough to help him come first, so our boy accepts his offer. His acceptance causes a grin to develop on Wrath's face, as he becomes certain that his plan to slowly take over Rayon's body is coming to fruition. Sometime later, the children go through another exercise. They're clearly exhausted after running around all morning and then doing a horse stance as instructed by Lemaire. Lemaire urges them on, stating that this stance is the foundation of all the training schools and everyone has to do it. He tells the boys to maintain the position till he tells them to stop, and he goes to take a nap. To give them an incentive not to quit when he goes, he reminds them that they'll be the ones taking the final test, and not him. Some of the students begin to complain about the tiring exercises and wish they could start learning how to use swords. After the exercise, Warren gathers some of the boys to go learn some sword techniques on their own, because their swordsmanship may become rusty if they spend all their time learning these basic exercises. Even though Wrath tries to urge Rayon to go join the other boys to practice the sword, Rayon doesn't believe it'll do them any good to start learning how to use swords at their current skill level. In his perspective, stamina and strength are what they need, not sword training. It's much worse for him because he has the curse of the bitter frost, so it's expedient that he prioritizes the basics. While Rayon is busy working out in the gym, he's stalked by Runan Slorn of the Vassal House, who is surprised by how he's been able to increase to bigger weights in just a few days, even after she heard he was sick. It makes no sense that he is able to increase weights at such a quick pace, and she even wonders if it's because he's using a different stance from everyone else. When she becomes more curious, she approaches him, but doesn't say a word. Her stare catches Rayon's attention, and he tries to ask her what she's doing there. He doesn't get a reply from her, and she just keeps asking herself what's causing the sudden increase in Rayon's growth. As she watches him in silence, something suddenly occurs to her, and she walks past Rayon to sit on another weight nearby. She starts to lift weights, and her behavior freaks Rayon out, so he leaves her alone. Eventually, he goes to other weights, but Runan keeps following him around. While she's with him, she remembers that she had caught a scent from Rayon just a few moments ago, which made her body feel lighter and helped her lift far more than her usual weight limit. When he starts to get creeped out, Rayon asks her if there's something she'd like to say to him, but she says there isn't any. Eventually, Runan decides within herself that she'll follow Rayon everywhere he goes. Shortly after, Warren and the boys step into the gym, and they're annoyed to see Runan going around with a boy who got expelled from the main family. To Warren, there's no point in doing such repetitive and simple basic training, and he's certain Rayon is doing it because he has a weak body, and he'll never be able to reach the superior quality of their bodies. To prepare for the upcoming test, he rallies the other boys to keep practicing their swordsmanship, especially not to get rusty. The boys soon leave, and Warren is certain that the exams will clearly show whether his way or Rayon's way works. Sometime later, a boy named Dorian respectfully asks Rayon if he can come train with him when he notices Runan following him around. Dorian is not a Sieghart but from an outside family. Rayon reluctantly allows him to train with him, so an excited Dorian offers him a cookie. Skeptical, Rayon attempts to return the cookie, only to look to his side and see Runan thirstily staring at his hands. She has this accusing and beautiful dog face, which freaks him out, so he concedes and hands her the cookie. Over time, the trio works out together. They even keep close proximity during their races, and they begin to bond. Flower time soon comes and training still goes on. It's been 6 months since the basic training began, and Rayon has been spending his days running as if his life depended on it. At this point, Rayon easily gaps everyone else in the running competitions, except Runan and Warren, of course. Some more time passes, and the day of the exam arrives. Parents and guardians from all over the land come to check and see how their wards will perform during the examination. They all gather in a large arena, and Lemaire addresses them. In the crowd, Sylvia, Helen, and Lord Karen are seen occupying some seats. Meanwhile, Wrath happily comes to remind Rayon of their wager. He's certain that Rayon will lose and accept their rage, since he's been unable to get past Runan and Warren during the training. Rayon quickly dismisses him, saying exams are a different ballgame, and you never know what can happen. Shortly after, Runan and Rayon find Dorian crouched somewhere, fearful about the result of the exam. The bond between Rayon and Runan has clearly developed, as she randomly offers him a cookie. Looking at the kind of people around him, our boy is worried that he seems to be attracting only weirdos. Meanwhile, Helen and Sylvia rejoice because their boy has valiantly lasted through the 6 months of training with his head held high, as well as made some friends. Shortly after, an announcement is made about the arrival of the head of the house, who also comes to join the others to watch the display. It seems like it's not his usual habit, as the folks are surprised to see him at the event. Eventually, one person reveals that this is the Lord's first time attending this event. When Lemaire expresses his surprise at the Lord's presence, he gets a reply from Master Glenn about how this exam decides the future of the house, and it's imperative for the Lord to be there. Immediately after the Lord's arrival, Lemaire decides to begin the trainee selection exam, but he has to first disclose what the examination will be, because he hadn't told any of them before now. Out of nowhere, and much to the students' surprise, Lemaire releases a torrent of aura and tells them that the exam is to successfully pierce through his spiritual force. Lemire explains to the boys that they can't avoid spiritual force as fighters, and this exam is to test the strength of their spirit. Nearby, one of the guardians protests that the children have barely learned to use their auras, and now they have to perform a test for their spiritual force, and several other guardians join in to boo the instructor. Lemaire, who is tired of listening to their crap, explains that spiritual force isn't simply about the manifestation of one's aura, but true spiritual force is the rank of one's soul, molded over time through a warrior's accomplishments. Apparently, the true proof of a warrior is one that doesn't need an aura. As the guardians continue to protest, Lord Glenn interrupts their shouting and says that Lemaire is not wrong, because with or without an aura, all warriors develop a unique spiritual force according to the life they have lived. Depending on the intensity of the training, even those without auras are capable of developing strong spiritual force. The Lord's words silence all protest, and Lemaire says they can move on with the exams since they don't have any more complaints. The first person to be called upon is Runan. Lemaire tells her that the spiritual force he's about to exude is one that she can beat if she has given her all during training, and she'll pass if she successfully pierces it. With a smirk on his face, Lemaire begins to release a barrage of spiritual force at her that shocks her. The force clearly affects her because she soon starts wincing. So she's told that using her aura will automatically disqualify her, and her only option is the mental fortitude that has gotten her through the training. Despite the growing pain and opposite tide of the spiritual force, she manages to struggle through it and lay a hold on Lemaire's hand, which makes him proud of her success. She almost falls down, so he has to hold her up to stabilize her. He even commends the effort she's been putting into her training and says she should continue on that path. Much to his horror, Dorian is the next person called for the exam, and he's sweating as if he saw a ghost. He's asked to do the same thing Runan did by piercing through the spiritual force using the mental strength he's built during the training, but Dorian doesn't seem to think he has any. When posed with the other option of failure if he can't perform the task, Dorian forces himself through the storm, but collapses midway. Meanwhile, Rayon notices that the spiritual force dissipated for Dorian's test is different, and he wonders if Lemaire is adjusting the intensity of the spiritual force based on how much he has observed each child and noted their individual strengths. Eventually, Dorian manages to lay hold of Lemaire's feet, and the instructor congratulates him. He's also told to have more confidence in his abilities going forward. It's only sad that Dorian vomits all over the place after such a huge compliment. The next person that's called up is Warren Sieghart, and he's put through the same test. The intensity of spiritual force is so strong that Warren starts to wonder if the other kids really pushed through something this strong. He soon begins to shiver, and he realizes that his feet aren't moving. In response, Lemaire tells him that he possesses a more unique talent than anyone else here, but he and the children that followed him wasted their time practicing a sword technique that they don't even understand, instead of working on their constitution and mental fortitude. He's also reminded that he used his aura whenever things got hard, and he'll fail if he uses it here. Meanwhile, Warren can't afford to fail, and all that goes through his mind is the memory of his father's coldness as he chastised his older brother years ago. Upon realizing that his father will abandon him too if he fails this, he decides to charge forward with all his might. Eventually, he manages to trip forward and grab a hold of Lemaire's legs, and he passes. Lemaire adds a piece of advice and tells him he's only 12, and he needs to stop trying to act mature and train at a level appropriate for his age. The last person to be called is Raon Sieghart. When he steps forward, he also gets a blinding spiritual force thrown at him, almost causing him to lose his balance. But the weight of the spiritual force thrown at him is so much stronger than what the other kids endured that his mother and Helen become worried. Even Lord Glenn is surprised by the weight of spiritual force that Lemaire is throwing at the kid. Meanwhile, Raon becomes worried by the weight of the force, and he wonders if this is really his exam. Lemaire had done this because he saw more potential in him than in Runan and Warren, and he tells him to give it his best shot. The thing is that one's rank isn't decided by one's physical form, but by the expanse of one's soul. The good part is that Raon doesn't only have Roa Sieghart's soul, but also has spiritual force cultivated by the life of the assassin Raon. Eventually, much to Lemaire's surprise, our boy pushes through the spiritual force, even getting the attention of the Lord. When he gets inches closer to Lemaire, Lemaire is certain that this can't be really happening. Unlike some of the other kids, Raon doesn't trip, but just walks up to Lemaire and pushes him backward. It's a shocking sight, and the onlookers gasp in surprise. Lemaire and the Lord are left speechless. Raon is left with a smile on his face and asks if he passed. The others find it impossible that our boy was able to pierce through all that force, and even Karun is shocked that the brat kid was able to reach Lemaire. Lemaire just remains awestruck for a while and wonders how a sick person who can't use his aura easily could go through all that. Eventually, Lemaire asks Raon what he is, and Raon bluntly replies that his name is Raon, the same kid he's been watching for 6 months. Lemaire protests that he exuded a spiritual force greater than his potential to see him struggle, so it shouldn't have been possible for him to pierce it. His words make Raon shrug, which ticks off Lemaire further. Eventually, the time comes for Lemaire to announce the result of the exam and the top trainee, as he had promised. Warren and his father become tense as Lemaire announces Raon as the top trainee for this training period. Sylvia and Helen burst into tears after hearing the news that their Raon came in first. While the people chatter concerning the interesting results, Warren loudly tells Lemaire he can't accept these results because they're made up. His accusations surprise Lemaire, who listens to him boast that he surpasses Raon in strength, constitution, and potential. When he speculates that Raon must have used some sort of trick or spell, some of the people start to support him, saying Raon shouldn't have been able to do that with the curse of bitter frost and without an aura. The protest becomes so flared up that even the straightforwardness of Instructor Lemaire comes into question. Eventually, Warren suggests direct combat with Raon to settle this score. Lemaire notes that Warren must be doing all this because he really wants the top-ranked title, and he leaves the decision to Master Glenn to decide on a way to clear up the allegations. The Lord decides to ask Raon if he's willing to spar with Warren to prove to everyone that his results are indeed true. Raon replies to the Lord that he's not going to spar with him, because the exam results have already been announced, and there's no point in sparring when it won't benefit him. To settle the score, the Lord suggests that they spar for the title of top trainee, and offers a bronze medal to Raon if he wins. This catches Raon's attention because the gold, silver, and bronze medallions are given out by House Sieghart according to the receiver's feat, and the rewards they grant also vary in value. With such a medallion from the Lord of the House, it means he can get a good reward for it. The new offer gets Raon convinced. The instructions for the spar are that it will consist of 1 round, and the use of weapons or auras will result in a loss, so they'll only be allowed to use their physical bodies. The sparring soon begins, and Warren rushes in to land a punch on Raon's face, only for him to quickly dodge it as the punch sweeps past his nose. Surprised that he dodged it, Warren tries to rebound with a kick, but Raon blocks that as well. Warren declares that his father taught him the technique he's using, called the Charging Tiger Technique, and continues to land attacks on Raon, who continues to block. Some of the people feel that Raon can't do anything to retaliate, and Warren's pain is that he's been challenged by a weaker person from a branch family. He promises himself that there's no way he'll hand over the top trainee title to Raon, and the memory of his father abandoning his elder brother because he's a weakling sweeps through his mind. All that's on his mind as he fights is that his father is watching, and he has to prove himself. Meanwhile, Raon keeps blocking or dodging all of his attacks. The reason Raon hasn't fought back is because he's taking his time to study the flow of Warren's fists and his technique, and he eventually understands it. Upon seeing Raon halt, Warren is certain that Raon has given up, so he goes in to finish him, but Rayon matches up his punch with another punch. Much to Warren's surprise, his hand is deflected backward, and his opponent lands a killing punch in his stomach that knocks spit out of his mouth. The turn of events shocks the crowd, as well as Warren's father. What shocks everyone, including Lord Glenn, is how Rayon managed to respond with the charging tiger fist. When Warren asks him how he learned to use the technique, Rayon informs him that he showed it to him, and he had just imitated his skill. The crowds begin to murmur among themselves, wondering how it's possible for such a brat to have used the charging tiger fist, and they wonder if he somehow learned it. Meanwhile, Warren hasn't recovered from the punch, and Lemaire is certain that Rayon is the real deal. He wonders how Rayon managed to counter the charging tiger's fist with a reverse spin of his own to nullify its power just by watching another person do it. In Lemaire's eyes, this is the talent Sieghart has been searching for, the potential to stand at the pinnacle of the continent. After a short pause, Rayon is declared victorious since the results of the test are clear for everyone to see. Sylvia can't hold it in, so she rushes forward and squeezes Rayon with tears in her eyes. Meanwhile, Runan's father does the same to her. Warren, on the other hand, is only accompanied by his butler, and his father turns his back on him, which was the very thing he dreaded. Later that night, a strong silence looms in Warren's home. Eventually, his father breaks the silence and asks him if he remembers how he told him to rank at the top of the trainee exam and not to lose to anyone. He asks Warren if he plans to humiliate him by performing lower than the Slorn brat and the child of a failure. He reminds him that he's already lost one chance, and his only chance to redeem himself is to bring back the title at the last exam they'll have during graduation. As he walks out, it's clear to Warren that he can't squander his final chance if he wants to live a life befitting a member of the main family. Anger rises in him, and he begins to blame it all on Rayon. It doesn't make any sense to him why he fell behind anyone's pace when he had worked hard enough. As he walks around in despair, he manages to wander to the training center's gym during his anger bout. The gym is empty because they had their exam today, and Warren notices the students' lockers nearby while working out. Rayon's locker draws his attention, and it seems like it won't hurt to peek since he isn't stealing anything. He's shocked to find about 10 pairs of shoes, and it's more surprising that Rayon had worn them out within 6 months. His memory brings him back to how he always saw Rayon tirelessly training in the gym, even while he was busy swinging his sword to gather clout, and while he was relaxing in his lodgings too. It's clear to Warren that Rayon was displaying the attitude of a true Sieghart, and he wasn't. He morosely returns everything and leaves. Sometime later, Wrath, who is angry that he lost the bet, complains that he hasn't seen anyone like Rayon even though he's lived for countless years. Eventually, he asks Rayon what he is, but he doesn't get a suitable reply. The screen notifies Rayon that he's won Wrath's wager, and all his stats will increase by 2, and he's gained one of Wrath's attributes called the Awareness of the Snowflower. To explain what the attribute is, Wrath states that it's a godly attribute that doesn't suit his puny existence. The skill increases the range of one's senses, but since it's only 1 star, it should only increase Rayon's senses by 1%. Wrath gloats that he was able to use the system to increase the range of his senses to about 10 times. It's odd that the attribute is called Awareness of Snowflower, so he asks Wrath why it's named that. Even though Wrath thinks it's a magnificent name, Rayon realizes that Wrath has terrible taste, which further infuriates the spirit. Sometime later, a message comes for the main building that the Lord had summoned Rayon. This message makes Sylvia tense because she's worried that something will happen to Rayon, but the butler assures her that there is no problem. In fact, Master Sieghart has decided to award Rayon the bronze medal himself. Upon reaching the throne room, Lord Glenn seems to disapprove of the entire situation, but he decides to still give the medallion to keep his word. The medallion is given to Rayon, and he's told that he can request an appropriate item or boon in return, should he ever return it. Our boy quickly takes the option, and he asks what he has to do to return his mother to her original place, shocking the Lord. When Lord Glenn clarifies if he wants to return his mother to her position in the main family, he explains that it's possible if he achieves something that the whole house recognizes, but it's much easier said than done. In Lord Glenn's perspective, receiving the recognition of others in the Sieghart house is akin to reaching the moon, especially for an inexperienced person like him. The challenge excites Rayon, so he thanks Lord Glenn for his answer, returns the bronze medallion, and walks away. Before he leaves, the Lord informs him that he could have given him the answer to his question through his medallion, and he's yet to request his reward. Rayon remembers something he needs the most right now, so he asks for a cultivation technique. But he's soon told that the instructors will teach him that as he progresses through basic training. Our boy says that he needs a greater aura cultivation technique than what is taught in basic training, and he wants the Lord to impart 1 fitting of the bronze medallion. The shadow cultivation technique he learned in his previous life isn't enough for him, and he'll need a stronger one if he plans to return Sylvia to her original position and take Daru's head. After the Lord snaps his fingers, a mysterious library opens up, displaying an archive of several books, much to Rayon's surprise. The library shelves fill up with hundreds of books that tower over Rayon. Lord Glen informs him that this is a small fraction of the Sieghart bookshelves, and all he needs to do to get the book he needs the most is to stand at the center and raise his hands. As he does what he's told, he hopes that the new technique he gets will be better than the shadow technique. Suddenly, one of the books leaves the bookshelf on its own and descends onto Rayon's hands. A worn-out book appears in his hands, but the book that's selected shocks Lord Glen and his butler. Lord Glen wonders how it is that he got that specific book. Meanwhile, flames shoot out of the book toward Rayon, and he wonders what that has to do with a cultivation technique. When he opens the page, an explosive light bursts out of it, shocking Rayon. The Lord is clearly awestruck as the fire bursts out of the book. Suddenly, a vision appears in front of Rayon. In this vision, Lord Glen receives a report from one of the guards that Sylvia had left the house, but he tells the guard that none of that concerns him, and the growth of the house comes first to him. According to the vision, during the days when the Lord believed expressing emotions was a luxury and only thought of the growth of the house, he earned martial power that surpassed the limitations of the demons. However, he lost something in return. In that vision, Lord Glen later receives a message that his son-in-law and granddaughter were ambushed by a group called the Eton Mask, and they've been killed, and the Lord begins to tremble. Somehow, the Lord happened to reclaim his emotions, but there was nothing that could turn back the hands of time. He eventually decided that, regardless of the hate he'd get, he would give his all to protect the boy this time. All this is still pretty confusing to Rayon, and he wonders what sort of book this is. Shortly after, the book disappears, and it seems like the essence of the book fills up Rayon's body. He's soon called out by the Lord, who asks him what he just did, but he says he doesn't know, and all he knows is that he happens to know the content of the cultivation technique that disappeared just now. To confirm if he truly does, the Lord asks him the name of the cultivation technique, especially since he didn't read the book. After a short hesitation, Rayon says that it was the Million Flames technique. The screen soon pops up to notify Rayon that the Million Flames technique is burned into his memory, and he has faced the flames of eternity. This seems to be the usual process of being imparted with the aura cultivation techniques in the Sieghart library, and Lord Glen confirms if Rayon remembers the content of the book he just received. When he confirms that he does, Lord Glen informs him that he has received the reward befitting the bronze medallion, and he's excused. After Rayon leaves the hall, the butler remains awestruck by how Rayon was able to absorb the cultivation technique in the book. The specific technique in the book belonged to the founding lord of the house. In all of the house's history, no one has been able to receive nor read the cultivation technique of the first master of House Sieghart, so it was never expected that the book he'd get handed is the Million Flames technique. The butler becomes worried for the safety of Lady Sylvia and Lord Rayon if anyone were to find out that he received such a technique. But Lord Glen assuages his worries and informs him that no one knows about the technique. Meanwhile, it's clear to Rayon that the book and its content seem to have been passed on to him. According to Lord Glen, no one has been able to use the technique as it was, and it would have rotted away on the shelf if not for Rayon, so it seems to him that times are changing. To Rayon, it doesn't make any sense that Lord Glen would give him something so valuable, even more valuable than the worth of a silver or gold medallion. It's clear that the technique is on the level of the legendary Firelink technique, so it's worth learning properly. The only issue is that no matter how hard he tries, he's unable to gather his aura. Rayon didn't think that he would be able to comprehend a cultivation technique on this level right away, and Wrath notices that things aren't going the way he'd want. Unlike his usual character, Wrath advises him to do his best since he finally found a good cultivation technique, and it would be a big problem if his cultivation is interrupted and he becomes an invalid. It's clear that Wrath is right, but it's odd to think he's plotting something. The Golden Flames technique cultivates mana from nature and accumulates aura in one's core, so if Rayon were to ever be interrupted at a critical moment, his mana circuits or his core could be ruined, and he could become an invalid. The worst part is that he's particularly at risk because of the chill blocking his circuits. Because of the smirk on Wrath's face, Rayon tells him not to even think of interrupting him, but his words fall on deaf ears. When he realizes that Wrath won't listen to him, Wrath bluntly tells him that he will interfere once during his cultivation. Still creeped out, Rayon states that his body will be of no use to the spirit if he becomes an invalid, but it doesn't seem to matter to Wrath. This is because even though a normal human could never overcome it, Wrath can fix the body to use it. In Wrath's eyes, this is a golden opportunity that can't be passed on. Rayon tries to appear unfazed by the whole thing, but Wrath tells him to take off the act and quiver in fear because it's uncertain when he will wage his assault. For the first time, Rayon starts to see Wrath as the enemy. It's not surprising, since he's a demon and an incarnation of Wrath, so he won't pass up the chance to devour his whole body if he gets a simple chance. Prior to this time, Rayon had not paid attention to him because he's been behaving well, but it now looks like he has to keep a close watch on him. Also, another pressing matter on the ground is the fact that there's a maid that our boy has noticed always steps out at night for no specific reason. Meanwhile, the maid, Judiel, who seems to be Lord Karun's spy, writes a report about how there's usually nothing to report about Rayon apart from the fact that he mumbles to himself, but she finally has something to report. What Judiel is about to report is the caliber of the cultivation technique that he received from the Lord with the bronze medallion, and how extraordinary the mana flow she sensed during his cultivation was. It's clear to her that the information she has is something that the Palace of Warriors will find important. But she reconsiders since Rayon is just a child, and she wonders how long she'll have to be drafting these reports. As her custom was, she drops the paper on the river to float away to where her boss is. Not long after, a knife crosses her neck, and she hears the voice of a mysterious person telling her it's time to head back and threatening to kill her if she makes a sound or moves a muscle. As sweat profusely pours from her face, she wonders who her assailant could be. His voice, demeanor, and killing intent cause her to remain paralyzed as she looks into the river and sees Rayon's reflection. He soon informs her that he's sensed someone keeping tabs ever since he returned home and asks if she's satisfied with the information she's gathered. It's odd that he's been able to do that, because the maid's pretty sure she hasn't left any trace while trailing him. It's now clear that Rayon has just been pretending not to notice her all along. After forcing her to open her mouth, Rayon forces something into it that causes her to become nauseous. Then he retrieves her report from the river. Since he can't read the message on the paper, it's clear that she used a special paper that requires a special reaction to unveil it. After making some guesses and seeing how she reacts, he guesses that it's moonlight, much to her shock. Furthermore, her facial expression also changes after she mentions a few names and reaches Karun Sieghart, so he recognizes that she's taking orders from him. Judiel, who had apparently received years of training to become a perfect spy, is shocked that he could read her expression since her face revealed nothing. It eventually dawns on her that the substance that he gave her, which is making her burn up so much, is a rage worm. In a flashback, Judiel is tasked by Lord Karun to enter the annex to provide all possible information about Rayon and Sylvia, with many rewards promised. In the present, she asks him if he fed her a rage worm. Rayon, surprised that she knows about the rage worm, expresses his surprise. All attempts from her end to vomit it don't work. The thing is, the rage worm allows access to the host's location and emotions at all times, and it also causes a bitterly painful death when the feeder chooses so. Furthermore, Rayon figures that she must be a spy from the Palace of Warriors who had been placed in the annex 7 months ago after the discernment ceremony. A look of horror sweeps past Judiel's face, as this is now the easy task she had envisioned. It was supposed to be an easy task to gather information on a mere child who is also an invalid, and Sylvia. She had not been able to guess that there would be such a monster at the annex. Due to fear of death, she offers to change the report immediately and falsify the entire thing. But Rayon doesn't take the offer because the truth will eventually reach Karun's ears, and it would only prove her incompetence. With an eerie look on his face, he tells her she'll become a double agent from this moment on. Her job is to give Karun information that he would have learned anyway, and conceal any important knowledge he has no access to. But in turn, she has to give Rayon every critical piece of information about Lord Karun, so Judiel eagerly agrees. The smile that develops across Rayon's face would make you think they're discussing over a cup of tea. He immediately asks her to provide some useful information the next time they meet and leaves. As he walks away, Wrath doesn't seem to believe that Rayon had been able to summon a rage worm since they've been together all along. It turns out that Rayon never gave her a rage worm because he finds it repulsive, and he just used a poison that temporarily causes intense pain. The question of how he read her mind comes up, and he says information can be gathered in different ways, and he has his ways. It's so shocking that even Wrath calls him a monster. Over time, Rayon turned his focus to creating his aura, and the time came to eventually return to the training grounds. Despite giving his all to developing aura, he couldn't achieve his goal before it was time to return. Upon reaching the training grounds, the number of people present reveals that only about 42 children passed, and it proved that Liamir was serious about leaving just a quarter of the trainees. Runan soon reunites with Rayon and they both just stare at one another for a short while, which creeps out Wrath a little bit. In a flashback, at the main house of the Slorn family, Runan's mom had asked her if Rayon had helped her with her training, to which she affirmed. When her mother asked her if she thanked Rayon for his help, she says she didn't because her father said not to talk to boys first. Eventually, her mother lectures her on the importance of receiving help regardless of gender because it's polite and expected. In the present day, she finally thanks Rayon, and it catches him off guard. Wrath wonders why she's acting like this out of the blue, and Rayon doesn't know either. Eventually, Dorian shows up again. He soon starts complaining about how he thought he would die when they were temporary trainees. But now that they're formal trainees, he spent the whole break having nightmares about how much harder things could possibly get. His yammering eventually starts to get everyone tired, and he even commends how much better Rayon's result was compared to Warren's. Little did he know that Warren was standing right behind him, so he screams and falls on the ground after seeing him. Warren soon walks up to Rayon, and a moment of silence passes. Out of nowhere, he bows and acknowledges that his behavior the previous week was terrible, and he accepts his loss. Eventually, he adds that this doesn't mean he's giving up because he'll face him again no matter what. Everyone remains stunned by what had just happened as Warren walks away. To Rayon, it's surprising that a 13-year-old kid could recognize his mistakes, and that seems to be him living up to the Sieghart name. Instead of respect, all that it elicited from Wrath is an outpouring of rage that they need to beat the insolent kid and gouge out his eyes because he doesn't know his place. Shortly after, Liamir shows up and greets the kids. After congratulating them on formally becoming trainees, they're informed that proper training begins immediately. They're also going to be keeping to the basics as usual, with a couple of additions. While they're talking, a nearby door slams open, and a strange girl appears in the field. She soon starts to say curse words too big for her age about how the door wouldn't open. Dorian freaks out as it seems he recognizes her, so Liamir declares that she isn't one of his trainees, but she flunked out of the last batch. Apparently, this girl will be joining them for the new batch, and her name is Marta Sieghart. She has a pretty mean look on her face, and she soon interrupts Liamir again, despite him trying to introduce her as a nice girl. Her first agenda is to call out the person who placed first in the last batch because she can't stand someone weaker than her over her head. She offers to fight whatever brat took the title the last time. The crazy girl demands a fight right on the spot, so Rayon steps out since she asked for the best student from the last batch. He doesn't look like the best to her, but she chooses to fight him regardless. The voice of Warren comes from behind Marta, and he asks why she's showing such disgraceful behavior. His words result in a confrontation by Marta, who goes at him head-on and threatens him to watch his trap, so he doesn't die from flapping his lips like that. After he asks her if she's defying Rayon's clear win that was recognized by the chief instructor and Lord Sieghart, she refers to the fact that she heard he also threw a tantrum about it, so he has to let her do hers. When Warren publicly says he doesn't want a repeat of his pathetic behavior, it's clear to everyone that something seems to have changed about Warren. Shortly after, Runan gets between Marta and Rayon and tells her to go away. In Marta's mind, they all seem like a happy family in a band of losers, so she decides to leave them alone and let them have their way. In fact, she only turns around to distract them, and she soon executes her actual plan, which is to lunge toward Rayon while they're not looking. Before any of them can react, she goes in for the kill, but her attack is easily blocked and dodged, much to her surprise. In response, Rayon reacts with his own killing punch, which she fortunately manages to block, but the impact throws her backward. A look of satisfaction crosses Lemaire's face, and a look of shock crosses Marta's face based on how quickly Rayon was able to react to her attack. Infuriated, she heads back toward Rayon, but Lemaire holds her down. It's also a bit surprising that Lemaire was able to move from where he is to where she is in a split second. Finally, he jokingly tells her that it's not nice to ignore him, and he knows that they don't think highly of him, but treating him like he doesn't exist hurts his feelings. Apparently, apart from Runan and Warren, Rayon hasn't even learned to use his aura, so Lemaire suggests that they can fight all they want once he learns it, which eventually causes Marta to concede. After they settle, Wrath overreacts and demands to know why Rayon let her go after she attempted to hit him, and suggests that he tears her to shreds and encases her in ice for a millennia. Rayon exposes his plan to avoid violence for some time, until when she has something he wants, then he'll wager the title of the top trainee for it. He asks Wrath to be patient and promises something far more satisfying down the line. Later on, the kids are trained on their stance, and they get a 10-minute break. Warren, who is focused on the basics, considers the fact that it's not so easy. So far, he's been able to learn the second form, which wasn't difficult, but he had issues with the third form, which is more convoluted. The interesting thing is that Rayon, on the other hand, learned all 7 forms in less than a month, while it took him a whole month to learn the 7 forms first. His worry is that they'll be going into swordsmanship classes together. Warren doesn't seem to be the only one feeling the pressure, so he asks Marta, who seems to be struggling, how she's coping. She curses again, certain that Rayon is learning fist techniques for the first time here, but is somehow picking them up so quickly. Unlike Warren and Runan, Rayon didn't receive any training ahead, and the worst part is that he has the curse of frost, but somehow he can still train all day. The realization infuriates Marta more, and she tells herself she can't fall behind. Everywhere she's always been reported to have electrifying talent. After being adopted into House Sieghart, she's always been the predator. She overtook those so-called prodigies of the main and branch families and laughed at their despairing faces, since she was the real prodigy. Unlike that time, she now feels so nervous that she can't stand it. At the end of the day, one of the workers on the training ground commends Marta's good work that day. She barely pays any attention to him, but he stops her to tell her that despite Rayon's recent achievement, it's impossible for him to defeat her now or ever. When she asks him to elaborate on what he means, he reminds her that Rayon has a critical weakness that he can never overcome. While Rayon practices his sword training, he's approached by some boys who have a question for him about the sword stance. While the boys watch him make a demonstration, they consider how incredible his technique is. In contempt, Marta commends the fact that Rayon made it to the same swordsmanship class she is in such a short time, and says he may even be called a prodigy. However, she intentionally points out how terrible his mana sensitivity is, which means all his sword talent will go to waste since he can't use mana. She jokes that he could end up as an instructor at best, and the entire training hall goes silent, which is exactly the response Marta wanted to get. Her plan was to point out that after 4 months, Rayon has failed to learn to use his aura. In retrospect, the butler had told Marta about how terrible Rayon's talent for aura is. He recounts a story that had occurred before her adoption at the first discernment ceremony, about how the Sword of Discernment had shown that Rayon's mana potential was incredibly low. To add to that, he's presently the only trainee on the 5th training grounds unable to use his aura. The man speculates that the highest-ranking mana cultivation technique that anyone can earn from a bronze medallion is a mid to upper one, which is only slightly improved from the entry-level lined cultivation technique. Since Rayon seems to have failed to master it, his mana talent seems to be at the lowest rank. This news gladdens Marta, who figures that his sword and fist techniques would still be inadequate to allow him to become a proper warrior if he lacks the potential to use mana. In truth, one of the things that's pissing her off is that a failure like Rayon was able to counter her attack. While she's rejoicing over the low blow she just landed, she spots Runan glaring at her, and she asks if she has something to say. Runan forces her to leave the training hall. That evening, after training for the whole day, Rayon decides to call it a day. He enjoys the training because, in his past life, he didn't learn martial techniques and has only learned what he needed to survive and assassinate. Now, developing himself through martial arts seems so fun. As he usually does, Wrath is enraged that Rayon did nothing while Marta taunted him in the training hall, but Rayon pretends to not have heard that she was talking. He reminds Wrath that there's nothing to get out of fighting her now, as he had said earlier. Suddenly, he hears a knock on his door and opens it to find Runan there with a box. He's surprised to see her there, and is more surprised when she opens her box to hand him a small brown confectionery to eat. He's not certain what it is, and she urges him to eat it. His better senses as an assassin remind him that he shouldn't eat it, but he doubts that she'd give him anything that would hurt him. Upon consumption, he's shocked by how well it tastes, and even Wrath expresses that he's never experienced such sweetness like this, even in the demon world. The two of them start to go on a frenzy about how sweet it is, and Runan finally tells him that it's called orb ice cream. When she turns around to leave, Rayon tries to call out to her, but she doesn't turn back. While Wrath demands for her to bring another, the thought on Rayon's mind is if she came because she was worried about him. Runan loves sweets as one would expect from a child, and it seems she had given him the last orb ice cream she had. The thought of her kindness brings a smile across his face, and he reasons that he has to return the favor. Shortly after, Rayon returns home, and he gets extreme motherly love after it seems he's been gone for months, but he's in fact been gone for a week. After Rayon reads through the monthly report Judiel plans to send to the Palace of Warriors, he asks her if she's gotten any intel from them. Apparently, there's really been nothing, except from a stronger order to investigate Rayon more closely after the pace at which Rayon was learning martial art techniques was revealed, but that seems to have reduced after his inability to use aura was revealed. It also seems like Lord Karun has lost interest in Lady Sylvia. Curious, Judiel asks Rayon if he's intentionally avoiding learning to use his aura. Instead of answering her, he asks her the same question, which makes it clear to her that it's not in her place to ask. The truth, as revealed by Wrath, is that Rayon is just having a difficult time learning to use aura, and he considers this an unfathomable and pathetic plight that he would never suffer. In response to that, Rayon goes to train to increase his chances of manifesting his aura, and Wrath calls him a monster. The only odd thing is that Rayon runs into Instructor Lemaire playing with some birds when he steps out to train. When Rayon asks what he's doing in his backyard, Lemaire replies that he's here to give him some specialized training about elements. The next morning, Lemaire ends up taking Rayon up a mountain. When he protests that they're supposed to be learning about elements, Lemaire reminds him to trust the process. It also doesn't make sense that this is a good place to learn about aura elements. Finally, Lemaire recalls the day he used his senses to inspect Rayon's cultivation technique. The aura he saw resembled flames as fierce as lava, and its strength was on another plane from other cultivation techniques. It wasn't trying to erase the chill built into Rayon's being, but it was attempting the extraordinary by accepting it side by side with fire. Apparently, if Rayon learns this cultivation technique properly, it would be something else. They eventually reach a good spot, which in Rayon's mind is just the middle of the forest. Eventually, Lemaire releases a blinding amount of spiritual force that shocks Rayon. Apparently, the wind Rayon is feeling on his skin is a wind as sharp as the edge of a blade. Apparently, there are different kinds of wind, ranging from warm to cold to sharp. Because he wanted a wind sharp enough to cut anything, he found just that. And now it's Rayon's turn for discovery. But this time he's going to be thinking hard about the flames he wants, since his mana is flame-prone. Eventually, Lemaire takes Rayon to a place he believes will be perfect for him. They both soon arrive at the home of an old blacksmith who playfully taunts Lemaire. This is apparently the place Rayon can feel the hottest and most sincere fire in all of the north. The old man asks what Lemaire has brought for him, referring to Raon, and he's informed that he's Master Sieghart's grandson. None of them impresses the man, who asks that the master come himself. Meanwhile, Rayon is enthralled by the fire he sees in the furnace. Apparently, this type of flame is what he's known all his life. Although he's seen many forms of fire in his last life, the flames of this kiln, the intensity of the heat, are the image of the flames he wants. The old man speaks rudely and says his name is Vulcan. From Rayon's past knowledge, Vulcan is the continent's master blacksmith, known all around the world. He was said to be the creator of Glenn Sieghart's sword, Heaven's Renown. Our boy bows and introduces himself, expressing his honor to meet the great Vulcan. His politeness makes Vulcan wonder if Lemaire had told him something about him. Lemaire, who refutes having told him anything, explains to Rayon that Vulcan is Sieghart's retired master blacksmith, who began feeding these flames over a decade ago. This seems to be the only place for Rayon to properly feel fire. When Lemaire asks for an exception, Vulcan suggests that they go to the blacksmith workshop, but Lemaire protests that no good will come from others seeing Rayon's cultivation technique before he's actually mastered it. Vulcan wonders why, and he's told that Raon is Sylvia's child, which gets Vulcan's attention. After Rayon swears not to get in the way and begs for a chance to feel the fire, a moment of silence passes, and Vulcan tells him that he's currently creating golden coal capable of a far stronger heat than white or black coal, and that's why he spent the last decade here. Vulcan informs him that it doesn't matter what he does as long as he doesn't interrupt his work, which gladdens Rayon's heart. When they step outside, Lemaire expresses his surprise to Vulcan about how he readily gave permission to the kid. When he promises to bring him some quality alcohol, Vulcan makes it clear that he didn't do it for him. Apparently, the flames in the kiln burned hotter when Rayon stepped into the room, and the sudden heat was enough to ruin the coal. The power to stoke flames permeates the child's very breath, and Vulcan considers that the kid may just be the one to fulfill his dream. Over the next 7 months, Rayon continues visiting Vulcan's kiln, and he has time to think about the image of the flames he wants to master until he finally understands it. People say that fire is the strongest and scariest element, but if it can be controlled, that changes things completely. Fire in skilled hands is more stable than any other element. However, the major issue is that Rayon hasn't been able to master how to awaken the energy of the Golden Flames art yet. A memory of how Lemaire had told him to think about the image of the flame he wants flashes through his mind. As Rayon thinks about his goal to kill Darius and restore Sylvia to the main family, it's clear to him that the flame he needs is one that would light his path and defeat the beasts that threaten him no matter the circumstance, and will never go out. Suddenly, a bright flame bursts out in front of him. The energy of the fire begins to seep into him, so he decides to focus and capture the fire to feel more of it to proceed with the cultivation. It seems like he's in some sort of trance state because he can see the manifestation of the fire he's picturing in front of him. While still trying to focus more, wrath tears into his mind and reminds him about his plan to take over his body at the moment when he's most vulnerable. As Rayon begins to freeze because of the interruption to his cultivation, he realizes the passage of time had made him drop his guard and forget that wrath is not truly on his side, but is just a demon that has been plotting to take his life, and worse, he's the ruler of the demon realm. His body begins to feel like it's shattering, and it becomes harder to breathe. It's clear that he'll die if he moves, and he'll also die if he decides to stop the Golden Flame art cultivation. His only choice is to focus and find a way to gather his aura so he can survive. The atmosphere becomes tense as it becomes paramount to survive, while Wrath taunts his desperate attempts to survive. Rayon's mind becomes hazy, and Wrath states that his body and soul belong to them because anything he tries will be futile. As he passes out, Wrath tells him all his life is in vain, and he's no different from the old man who spends his days burning coal, but he assures him that he'll carry out his revenge for him. The mention of coal in a kiln gives Rayon a last-minute hint, which is a desperate measure necessary so he doesn't die. Apparently, it's not the mana from nature that's heated by the kiln that he needs to absorb, but the mana within the kiln itself. The stronger, hotter fire will devour everything, and their power can become his. As he begins the process, Wrath begins to get infuriated that he's changing his approach. Meanwhile, the coal in front of Vulcan begins to crackle and pop louder. Much to his surprise, the flame bursts out of the furnace, and he's never seen the heat of the furnace spike so abruptly. It occurs to him that something might be going on with Ryan, but he notices that the boy is trembling, which is odd because there shouldn't be a concentration of cold in the midst of all this heat. It's unclear why the boy is shaking like that, and if that's not enough, Lemaire suddenly appears to stop Vulcan from touching Rayon. Vulcan protests that the boy will die if he's left like that, but Lemaire insists that there's nothing they can do since he's in a trance state. Apparently, if the boy feels so much as a slight pressure, he'll cough up blood and die. There seems to be frost scattered all over Rayon's body from the chill he's experiencing, but there seems to be nothing at all that either of the men can do to help him. Lemaire silently hopes that Rayon doesn't die. Meanwhile, in the trance, Rayon's cultivation continues to infuriate Wrath, who demands that he stop because there's no hope for him. Rayon refuses to go down without a fight like his previous life, which was spent in vain, without peace, until he breathed his last breath. All that's on his mind is that he won't repeat that life, and he continues towards the fire. The heat becomes too much, and at the rate things are going, it seems the kiln cannot withstand the sudden burst of firepower. All of the kiln's mana mysteriously begins to collect in one place, and Lemaire wonders if Rayon is absorbing all the mana. In the trance, the tug-of-war continues until Rayon finally takes hold of the flame. Once he does that, a huge explosion occurs that tears through the entire trance, and literally tears through the roof of the kiln as well. When the explosion occurs, the two men become worried about Rayon's safety, but they don't receive a reply from him. Shortly after, the boy emerges from the flames unscathed with golden flames like nothing any of them have seen before. Meanwhile, the screen displays that Rayon has acquired golden flame art. Apparently, he had absorbed a powerful heat, and his golden flame art has reached 2 stars, produced fire resistance, gotten 2 strands of the curse of bitter frost melted away, and gotten rid of his terrible stamina. Apparently, he has also accepted the melted frost from Wrath's powerful chill, and produced an attribute known as Chill of Bitter Frost, which is at 2 stars. It seems that Wrath's attack was a blessing in disguise because Rayon wasn't expecting all of this when he went through all that trouble. Suddenly, because he withstood Wrath's interference in a dangerous situation and displayed intense mental fortitude, the system increased all his stats by 3. All of this comes as a shock to Rayon, and it seems that he has achieved a level that would otherwise have taken years if it had not been for Wrath's meddling. After Wrath realizes he's been swindled, he demands to know how Rayon was able to survive since his mental fortitude had hit its limit. As usual, Rayon gloats that he had told him that he couldn't beat him. The truth is that Rayon really almost died. If this day proved anything, no matter how friendly he's grown to Wrath, he truly is an enemy, which means he can't let him know his weaknesses or secrets from now on. Shortly after, Vulcan comes to check on Rayon and finds out he's alright. When he asks if he was able to get his aura, Rayon says he did, and it was all thanks to him. The bad part is that the furnace was broken from the explosion, and Rayon apologizes, but Vulcan doesn't care as long as he's alright. While they're talking, Vulcan notices a strange thing in the fire. When he finally picks up the coals with a shovel, he realizes they're golden coals, which he has been working on for all these years. In a flashback to the past, many people had gossiped and made fun of Vulcan for spending all his time making coals that only appeared in myth. In the present, as Vulcan brings out the coals, he realizes he has also experienced a miracle. The golden coal is one that burns hotter than white coal and has a stronger tenacity than black coal, and he's finally been able to find what he devoted decades of his life to creating thanks to Rayon. When Rayon protests that he didn't do anything, Vulcan explains that his mana cultivation caused the rise in the kiln to flare, and the flames bloomed as he exhaled and caused the heat to spread to every corner of the workshop. Finally, the old man asks Rayon what kind of warrior he wants to be, and he says that he wants to be steadfast, no matter who he faces or the situation he finds himself in. His response surprises Vulcan, especially because it's coming from a kid, so he suggests that he come see him if he truly remains steadfast in 3 or 5 years when he can finally wield a sword. Apparently, he plans to save the golden coals for the day Rayon comes to find him. Although Vulcan has retired, he plans to make an exception to help Rayon make his sword. Shortly after, Rayon leaves the kiln to return home, and Vulcan hopes he doesn't die until they meet again. Meanwhile, Lemaire is glad that Rayon finally gained his aura. Master Sieghart appears behind, and Lemaire taunts him by saying he must feel relieved not to have to worry anymore after coming every day to check on his grandson. Obviously, his accusations are met with a blatant denial from Lord Sieghart. Lemaire ignores his denial, and notes that the size and purity of Rayon's aura is no joke, and it could be because he absorbed all the heat in the kiln. On top of that, the kid was able to use his new aura right away, which shows incredible potential. Apparently, there's something else that the Lord noticed, and that is how Rayon took the yoke around his neck and made it his own. At the 5th training grounds, Runan seems to be patiently awaiting Rayon's return with a box of chocolate in her hands. Meanwhile, there's much rumor going around about how Rayon hasn't been able to make his aura for 7 months, and how Lady Marta should take the top title because it seems Rayon isn't as important as he seemed. Runan doesn't like all the rumors she's hearing, and she thinks of a way to help him, also considering her mom's advice to return the favor for people she's thankful to. After much waiting, Rayon returns to the training ground after several months, still having his usual arguments with Wrath about why he couldn't defeat him. To his surprise, the first person he runs into is Runan, who gives him a box full of orb ice cream. Apparently, she's worried that he's not been able to cultivate his aura, so she tells him to chin up. While Rayon thanks her for the ice cream from last time, a whiff of a refreshing scent that Runan always picked up from him hits her. The scent seems stronger now and smells nicer, but she doesn't seem to know why. Rayon thanks her for the ice cream once again, and even Wrath is ecstatic about the incredible taste, urging Rayon to devour the other 2 ice creams immediately. To Rayon, that's not a good idea because he considers that she's giving him a snack she really treasures, so he berates Wrath to stop acting like a child. Instead of taking more, he just closes the box, which shocks Runan, who had expected him to take more. When he refuses, she asks him if he feels cheered up, and he affirms, which makes her blush. His response gives her great joy, and she walks away happy, but Rayon is amused by how mysterious she seems sometimes. When the students gather to be addressed, they're told that they're going to switch up the training regimen to something special in a month, since they're all pretty tired of doing nothing but training. Apparently, they've been working on the basics and cultivating mana for 7 months, so it's time to start heating up the cores. The declaration elicits surprise from the students, who are surprised that they're doing that so early. Lemaire elaborates and says they'll start sparring next month, and that statement brings much joy to Marta, who had been looking for an excuse to fight all along. Apparently, the outcome of the spar will affect their graduation and they'll be ranked accordingly. Because of this, they're urged to put their all into preparing for the next month. As usual, Marta rudely interrupts and asks what they'll do about their friend, who still can't make an aura and has fallen completely behind, referring to Rayon. As the students begin to murmur, Lemaire quiets them down by informing them that this friend has fortunately been able to make an aura, much to Marta's dismay. The information surprises her, and she wonders when he was able to make one. Although stunned, she turns around and taunts him for taking so long to create his aura. She reminds him how she told him that she doesn't take orders from anyone weaker than her when they first met. Apparently, she's been pretty patient to let him wear a title he doesn't deserve, but all of that will change because she plans to end him when they get a chance to spar. Warren's hand creates a dividing line between Marta and Rayon. He asks her to step back because there's no honor in planning to spar with him in a month's time, when it hasn't even been a full day since he acquired his aura. In response, Marta makes a derisive comment about Warren's views about honor, stating that honor is given to those who deserve it, especially since the other loser picked up their aura within a month. But it took their valedictorian over half a year. More murmuring continues as she states that 7 months was enough to make an aura with a high-ranking technique, which just proves that Rayon doesn't have a talent for this. She tells everyone that a warrior who can't use an aura will never be famous, no matter how talented he is in swordsmanship. She even speculates that the reason the instructor suggested a spar is because he wants to create a new ranking because the old one was faulty, but Lemaire doesn't give a direct response. To Marta, Rayon has held onto the title of the top trainee for quite a while, considering his skill level, and it's time for him to step down. To pick up from where they left off, she suggests that the winner of the spar can have the position of the top trainee, but Rayon passes on her suggestion. Rayon says it's not possible for one to sit at a gambling table with no money, so there's no point for him to put his position on the line when she isn't offering something of matching value. Instead of conceding, she states that he seems to be under the impression that anyone here is on the same level as he is, but Rayon asks her if she's scared. His words rile her up, so she decides to play his game since it's the last one he'll get to play. To get him to bet, she offers up a 9 Blossoms pill her father gave her, which is an elixir that augments your physique and aura if he wins. Her offer brings a smile across Rayon's face, and he reminds Wrath how he told him that he'd show him something more exciting by getting something from Marta. A month later, the time for their sparring comes, and Marta is glad she can finally repay the favor. Apparently she's never been hit before, not even in the back alleys, and the time when Rayon hit her was the first time someone succeeded. 8 months later, she finally has the opportunity to pay him back for that humiliation. Since Rayon has only learned to use his aura for a month now, she's certain that sparring him will be a walk in the park since she's been using her aura for 3 years. It's clear that he's a twerp that has no potential, but she recalls that she still has to ensure he gets stronger fast because there's someone she has to rescue. As she steps out with the certainty that today is Rayon's end. On the day of the match, the other kids are told to watch the fight, as that can be helpful for their sparring and help them plan their own sparring. The first set of people to be called up are Warren and Dorian, but Dorian immediately forfeits even before they start, which surprises Lemaire. His excuse is that he doesn't feel very good because he's feeling very sick and didn't get a wink of sleep. Wrath, grumpy as usual, says Dorian's head would be rolling on the floor right now if he were his subordinate. It's quite clear to Lemaire that Dorian is making things up, so he urges him to try it out because he's still going to get something out of it even if he loses. The sword fight soon ends, as Dorian ends up on the ground and he surrenders. Meanwhile, Lemaire points out that Warren still doesn't have his emotions under control, and would have won the fight within 5 moves if he fought properly. Warren, on the other hand, expresses his frustration with Dorian, who just kept running all through the fight and didn't fight at all. The next people called out are Runan and Crane, the same Crane that had issues with Rayon earlier. When the fight begins, Crane quickly goes in for the first attack, which Runan doesn't dodge but just counterattacks with her own sword. Her counterattack causes his sword to fly out of his hands, shocking him. Before the fight can go any further, Lemaire stops the fight and gives some assessment. He points out how Crane is too tense and needs more flexibility when holding his sword. Runan, on the other hand, had a great counterattack, but didn't allow her aura to reach the end of her sword. The next set of people are called out, and the last set to be called out is Rayon and Marta. On the field, both fighters hit swords against each other in a frenzied fight. In a calculated attack, Marta aims her next attack at Rayon's face, which he easily blocks with a counterattack. Playing on the offense, she goes in for yet another attack, which Rayon counterattacks, much to her shock. After almost being hit by one of his counterattacks, she finally moves backward and expresses how she didn't expect him to counter all her blows, which makes her admit he has some skill in swordsmanship. However, because of his weak aura, she activates her aura and tells him she's going to put him in his place. As she goes in for the kill one more time, lunging toward Rayon head-on, she moves in close enough to land a final hit that'll knock him out. Her body has been watching her moves, so he quickly blocks that attack as usual, but the strength of the attack seems a bit more intense. Because he just keeps blocking her attacks, Marta taunts him by asking how much longer he can keep blocking, because using auras requires even more innate talent than swordsmanship. As the battle fiercely continues, she recounts that he can never become a warrior when it took him 7 months to create his tiny little aura. When she demands that he give up before she crushes him, he goes on the offense for the first time, forcing her to block his attack. Her talk about talent and how the family loves talent starts to tire him, but she jokes that it's because he doesn't have any. At this point, Rayon still hasn't used his aura, so she promises to show him what real talent is. Instead, Rayon offers to show her something more important than talent, and a bright golden flame starts to surround him as he finally activates his own aura. The display leaves Marta shocked as Rayon activates the Million Flame Art's first flame. Still stunned, she wonders what the flames are and realizes that the fire he's using must be dangerous because it doesn't look ordinary. The fire is terrifyingly beautiful to her, but it's clearly mysterious. As sweat breaks across her forehead, she holds her sword tighter, clearly unwilling to back down. Since things are becoming serious, she uses her card in her own trick called the Solid Stone Stance Focal Point. Focal Point is a special art that focuses the aura in one specific spot, and Rayon figures that she really must have incredible talent to be able to use that skill at her age. It's clear that she must be planning to put everything into her next strike. Before she attacks, Marta acknowledges his strength, but clarifies that there's no way he'll be able to withstand his next attack, even with an aura. Immediately charging toward him, she swings her sword at him, but he doesn't move out of the way. When she's several inches from him, he blocks her attack with his sword, and it causes an explosive force to be released that shatters the ground they're fighting on, shocking the nearby students. A smoke covers the entire field, blocking the students' field of vision. When the smoke clears out, Marta is seen on the ground in the midst of the cracked ground, with her sword broken, while Rayon towers over her. It's quite shocking to the other students that Rayon won against Lady Marta, and his sudden use of this mysterious aura makes less sense to them. Marta makes a fist even while she's knocked out, and to Rayon, her mental fortitude seems to be more impressive than her skill and talent. Later that night, Lord Glenn receives the report about how Rayon won Marta by crushing the aura she's been refining for 4 years with unbelievable power. Lord Glenn affirms that the flames he saw on the day Rayon got his aura were quite beautiful and their power was incomparable to their size. It seems that all of Sieghart knows about this now, so the Lord asks Liamir to lead Rayon so he can continue to grow without becoming overconfident. The Lord also asks about Marta, whom he learns had received a strong impact from the blow, but her wounds will heal with a bit of rest. The major problem seems to be the shock she received to her psyche, which they can only hope she'll be able to overcome. Meanwhile, while Rayon is doing some gardening, Wrath rages as usual because he's not doing it properly, and threatens to turn him into an icicle if he doesn't do it well. Rayon is clearly not scared of him and tells him to quit acting tough, but Wrath says his advantage is because he's hiding behind his water resistance, which has recently spiked like a coward. The reason it has spiked is because Rayon took the 9-blossom pill he received from the water the night he defeated Marta, which greatly increased his skills. He finally completed his 4th flame link, causing an increase in his body, rank, and soul, as well as his strength, constitution, and dexterity. His poor athletic ability disappeared, his poor mana affinity improved, and his water resistance increased. To be precise, the pill brought all of his effort to the surface. A lot of things increased, but the one that stood out was the water resistance, which went up to 4 stars. Thanks to that, he's been able to brush off most of Wrath's rage as cute tantrums. Today is his last day off, so he decided to come home to check on the flowers and take a break. While he's working, Wrath continues to mouth curses and correct him about the right way to thin the soil. As Wrath continues to complain that he should use his hand instead of a spade to ensure the nutrient-rich dirt reaches the flower, it makes Rayon wonder how he knows so much. Apparently, Wrath had filled a flower bed with ice flowers while he was in the demon world, which caused other demons to praise him, and he won't shut up about it. Out of nowhere, Marta appears, and Rayon asks her what she's doing here. Instead of speaking, she just keeps sizing him up and wonders how childish it is for him to be gardening, even though she knows he doesn't usually act his age. Suddenly, she declares that she'd like to fight him again. Rayon thinks it's pathetic that she can't accept her loss, but she protests that she's only here to find out how she ranks. To her shock, he asks her what he'll get out of it, since the loser should bring something if she wants to challenge the winner. When she insists that he doesn't need payment to fight, he turns down her offer, which gets her worried because she's hell-bent on fighting him. The thought of stepping on his flowers to infuriate him comes to her mind, but she soon finds out he doesn't really like flowers. He's just there to manage them for his mother, and that further infuriates her. Eventually, she decides to leave, but Sylvia suddenly comes out to greet Rayon, and she asks him who's his new friend, referring to Marta. Sylvia mistakes Marta for a new friend Rayon must have made at training, but Marta recognizes her as the woman who fell in love and left the house, only to return in order to save her child's life. Oddly to Marta, her actions to save her beloved child were brave. Unfortunately, it seems Sylvia has seen Marta before, so she recognizes her and introduces herself. Rayon becomes tense about the exchange of pleasantries, so Rayon makes it clear that they're not friends and tries to dissuade her. Regardless, Sylvia walks up to Marta and checks on her health after her fight with Rayon. Marta confirms that she's fine, which relieves Sylvia. Sylvia acknowledges that she heard her big brother Denier adopted a talented child, but it seems the child is as pretty as she is talented. The sudden attention starts to make Marta blush, so Sylvia asks her what brings her to their home. Marta, who is now uncomfortable, lies that she had a message to deliver and tries to leave. She doesn't know she's in big trouble until Sylvia grabs her by the arm and insists she have a meal with them because she can't let Rayon's friend leave without showing any hospitality. Regardless of her protest, Marta ends up at the dining table with Rayon and Sylvia. Rayon can't believe his eyes because he never thought he'd ever see the day that Marta sits down so obediently. Meanwhile, Sylvia tells her about how Rayon loves meat stew. Their chatting continues, and Sylvia soon learns that Marta is a year older than Rayon and is 15 years old. Sylvia gives her motherly treatment and asks her about her training. While Marta eats, Sylvia tells her that the quality of their meat isn't as good as the main house, and may be a little tough, so she pats her and tells her to eat slowly so she doesn't get a stomachache. Those words from Sylvia remind Marta of something her mother used to say to her when she was much younger. After she's done eating, she thanks Sylvia for the delicious meal and proceeds to leave. Sylvia, who is glad she enjoyed the food, professes that she hopes that she and Rayon stay good friends. Meanwhile, Rayon still can't understand why Marta is acting so calmly when she had just come to pick a fight with him moments ago, and he's certain she must have hit her head. As Marta heads home, it's clear to her that Rayon must probably think she's lost her mind. The reason she acted the way she did, though, was because Sylvia reminded her of her mother, and she couldn't push her away. Eating with Sylvia was like the times when she used to eat with her mom. Marta had made a promise to herself after her mom was kidnapped by some witch-blood church bastards, and she got adopted by Denier that she would never lose until she found her again. She's been able to keep that promise all this time and never lost a single fight until she lost to Rayon. The Siegharts adopted her because of her potential, and they just might kick her out if she loses this severely. Even though her father, Denier, is a gentleman, she wonders if that's all a facade, and she'll lose her only hope of finding her mother again. Pain courses through her body as she thinks about how she never should have lost to Rayon. When she enters, one of the workers named Camel informs her that Lord Denier wrote her a letter and he's been waiting to deliver it to her. Sweat breaks across her face as she wonders if the letter is about the spar. Upon opening the letter, Denier congratulates her on her first loss and says a single loss doesn't mark her as a failure, and she doesn't need to worry. He advises her to dwell on why she lost to help fuel her growth in the future, and he apologizes for his inability to speak to her in person because of the protracted nature of his mission. Finally, the letter explains that the investigation into the whereabouts of her birth mother is ongoing, and Denier asks her not to give up too. In response, Marta asks Camel to help tell her father that she's really grateful for his message. As she moves inside, she considers her dramatic loss to Rayon. As she cuts her hair, she decides not to acknowledge her defeat and move forward because she can't bring shame to her father. In her mind, she'll be stuck at this point if she overlooks this, and won't be able to look her father in the eye anymore when he trusts her so much. She decides it's time to let her pathetic past go and start over from the basics to move forward and become stronger. The next day, at the training center, the student seems surprised by Marta's behavioral change when she suddenly goes to meet Rayon to tell him that instead of giving a half-hearted apology for always picking fights with him, she'll follow her own words that the losers would have to follow the winner's orders. She leaves Rayon stunned because he didn't expect her to follow through with her words. He wonders if Marta has also changed in a short period of time since she's shown a greater display of maturity than one would expect at her age. When he notices her kick Dorian for getting in her way, it's clear that she's only changed towards him and not others. Soon after, the new year comes, and a lot changes in subtle ways. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Marta continued to listen to Rayon, and only him. Warren learned how to lead the trainees in a far calmer and level-headed manner, and Runan's sword grew sharper and more precise. Meanwhile, Rayon continued to train like his life depended on it. In one of their practices, Rayon does the new riverwalk technique so well that the students are shocked that he's already mastered it when it's been a few hours since they started learning it. His speed intrigued Lemaire so much so that he had to report the situation to Master Glenn. It seems to him that Rayon mastered the technique through visualization, which is quite unbelievable. Lemaire's continual rambling ticks off Lord Glenn, and he asks if he's his butler and why he always talks about Rayon every time they meet. Lemaire doesn't take his comment to heart because he's certain that Lord Glenn is also interested in the stories. From the top of the mountain, the frantic movement of many of the staff of the main house is evident, which makes Lemaire wonder if they're preparing for something. Lord Glenn informs him that some envoys from the Kingdom of Owen are expected in a few days, and that's what they're preparing for. The Kingdom of Owen is a member of the Six Lords, located at the center of the continent, and one of the few powers maintaining a close relationship with the Syaghearts, who are known for isolating themselves. It is a kingdom of knights that values warriors and sword arts. The representative of the incoming envoy is supposed to be the third prince, but in reality, it will be a man called Duke Tartan, whom Lemaire recognizes as a psycho. Lord Glenn instructs Lemaire that the trainees in all the training grounds have to maintain a sense of order, because the third prince will be accompanied by Owen's knights in training, and they would want to observe the trainees and instructors. Based on this, the Syaghearts can't be seen behaving disgracefully. This piques Lemaire's interest because the third Prince of Owen is apparently around the same age as Rayon, and he considers that this could really be an entertaining sight. His odd expression makes Lord Glenn worry that he's scheming something, but he can't place his finger on it. When Lemaire returns, he informs the trainees that they're going to be having sparring sessions with the knights in training from the Kingdom of Owen, in the presence of the third prince that same day. The trainees are shaken by the sudden information, but Lemaire reminds them that a warrior must be ready to swing his sword even if they just rolled out of bed. As the students murmur between one another, it's revealed that the Prince of Owen was supposed to go to the 6 training grounds and not to theirs, and they wonder why there's a sudden change. Apparently, a while back, Lemaire had secretly gone to meet the third prince after he had undertaken an unimpressive journey to the 6th training grounds, and he suggested that he come to the 5th training grounds if he has the time, promising to show him the real deal. It's clear that Lemaire had intentionally informed them the same day of the competition. Shortly after, Prince Owen and his knights in training step into the training ground, and the third prince, Greer du Owen, introduces himself to the trainees. As Rayon spots Greer, he's intrigued by how strong his force is for his age, and how incredible his presence is just from a glance. Lemaire, who is clearly trying to pin Rayon to fight against Greer, asks him if he's willing to spar with the prince. Meanwhile, Rayon figures that going against the prince might be a good way to test out the coordination between the riverwalk technique they just learned and their ignition sword arts. Rayon promptly agrees, which gladdens Lemaire, who dispatches 20 trainees from their end who would like to fight. Before they fight, Lemaire also informs the boys that he has bet his entire salary on them winning, so they better win or prepare to die if they lose. The students are shaken, but eventually gather to fight under Rayon's leadership. Before they start fighting, Rayon asks his teammates to look at their opponent's trembling hands, which exposes to them that their opponents are equally as nervous even though they're standing upright in their fancy uniforms. He reminds them that the intensity of their training is more than comparable to that of the 6 lords and the 5 demons, and that the blood and sweat they've poured into their training will surely show in their results. The confidence of the team soon rises after he gives his speech about how they need to give it their all and show their opponents what they're capable of. Because the Vanguard will be critical in raising the morale of the trainees and therefore requires a strong card that will certainly win, Raon makes Marta the Vanguard. When the Vanguard of the other team comes out, the trainees wonder if he's really their age because of his size. Marta, on the other hand, stands in front of him unfazed. The other Vanguard introduces himself as Tars and comments on how Marta has honed her juvenile form to its limits and wishes her a good fight. The gap in their physiques makes the other teammates wonder if Marta can really win against an opponent that size. But Marta, who is always cocky, informs Tars to stop with all the bull because she's going to win anyway. The fight soon begins, and Greer is surprised that Marta is able to overwhelm Tars in terms of strength despite her smaller frame. It's clear that the warriors of the 5th training ground are undeniably strong as they begin the Sieghart name, and they're powerful enough to be comparable to Kingdom Owen's knights. Compared to the 6th training ground, which was pretty disappointing, the trainees are clearly the real deal. Meanwhile, Duke Tartan asks Lemaire if this was his goal when he abruptly showed up at His Highness's lodgings yesterday and invited him to the 5th training round. Lemaire claims that he did this because there aren't many opportunities to safely face off against one of the talented fighters of one of the 6 kings, which makes it an educational opportunity for his trainees. When Duke Tartan calls bull, Lemaire suggests that they make a little bet on whose trainees can win the most out of 20 spars, because betting is far more fun than just watching. Duke Tartan tries to unsettle him by informing him that his trainees are some of the most promising knights in training of Owen, but Lemaire insists that he believes in his kids too. Meanwhile, Marta keeps landing strong strikes on her opponent, and the fight really looks intense. After one of her strikes shatters Tar's sword, he's surprised by the amount of strength she's applying to her attacks, but she just keeps attacking with a maniacal smile on her face. Finally, she slams the end of her sword into his stomach and knocks him backward, resulting in her winning the match. Everyone around is surprised by how the fight went, and Raon is surprised that she didn't refine her technique into something more graceful and fluid after their spar, but instead increased her strength and speed to reinforce her overall power. As usual, Marta taunts her opponent, referring to his fighting as pathetic, because he didn't put his all into his strike when his primary power comes from his strength. While Raon finds the fight entertaining, Wrath finds it quite boring and claims that the sparring of younger demons in the demon realm was more flawless than this. Before he can finish speaking, Raon shuts him up by hitting the bracelet so he doesn't ruin all the fun. After a couple of spars, the 18th spar is between Runan and Adelia. Once the two ladies reach the fighting field, Adelia expresses her disdain for Runan's vacant eyes. She soon activates her fiery aura, while Runan activates an ice blue aura. The fight soon begins and becomes intense, causing smoke to cover the fight arena from the sheer force of their clashes. Unknown to Adelia, Runan had found her way behind her while she wasn't looking, and quickly jumps towards her to land an attack. As she quickly turns back to perform a counterattack, Runan seems to fade away, to her surprise. As she wonders whether it was just an illusion, Runan appears from behind her again and puts her sword against her neck, catching her off guard. Because Adelia was open enough to be killed if it was a real fight, Runan is announced as the winner of the 18th match. As Adelia tries to congratulate Runan on her win, Runan doesn't pay her attention and walks to Raon to ask if he saw her fight. Raon notes that she seems to have gotten more comfortable with the river walk technique and commends her fighting. At this point, Raon's team seems to have 9 wins, while Owen's team has 9 losses, which is pretty good for Lemaire's bet. The 19th spar is between Warren and an opponent named Saren Castle. While the two boys introduce themselves, Raon notes that Saren is quite strong and must be the strongest of all the knights he's seen so far, excluding the prince. The fight soon begins, and both boys dash towards each other to land a strike. Both boys begin to clash swords, and Saren's power is similar to Warren's own, making it quite dangerous for either of them to let down their guard even for a second, due to their individual skill. Suddenly, as both boys strike their swords against each other, both their swords break, which results in a tie between both parties. When Warren returns to his station, Raon assures him that he did well, especially against the best trainee of the other team. That doesn't make Warren feel any better because he feels that doesn't matter since he had to win since he carries the Sieghart name. To comfort him, Raon pats his shoulder and tells him not to worry because he's going to win the final round and recover the Sieghart honor. Raon and Prince Greer step onto the fighting arena to have the 20th round of the sparring session. As they step out, Prince Greer is surprised that Raon's energy is far more ordinary than he expected from the person he'll be sparring with. Out of curiosity, Greer asks Raon if he's from the main family, and he's discontented that he's fighting a throwaway card when he learns he's from the branch family. Greer's previous intention was to battle either Runan, Warren, or Marta. To get a worthy opponent to fight with, Greer makes an offer with Lemaire to have a rematch with either Marta or Runan if he beats his opponent. Excited, Lemaire agrees with the offer as long as he warns. Greer even cockily asks him to get them to warm up because this fight won't last very long. To have enough strength to fight the real opponents, Greer decides to conserve his strength and avoid using his aura against the present opponent. Meanwhile, Duke Tartan wonders what sort of monster Rayon is because he has so much of a hazy presence that he almost missed it. Lemaire is intrigued that he was able to notice it and wonders why he didn't warn the prince, who seems to think that Rayon is a throwaway card. Duke Tartan reveals that he's not warning him because even though he's the future of Owen, he's never tasted defeat, so it would be good for him to experience a loss in a safe environment. However, Prince Greer is pretty strong, so it's apparent to the Duke that even a prodigious swordsman like Rayon won't be able to defeat him easily, but Lemaire doesn't agree. To settle their differences, Lemaire suggests another bet, and it seems like he's addicted to gambling. The bet is that Rayon will finish off Prince Greer in 5 moves. While they're still deciding on the bet, Rayon activates his aura, shocking Prince Greer. Even the Duke turns around in shock as he watches Rayon dash past the prince and land a staggering blow by his side, causing him to collapse. In just a few seconds, the fight is already over, and it's clear that there wasn't any reason to bet on 5 moves. It suddenly dawns on the prince that he had misjudged Rayon, and there's a good reason he came out last. It's because he's the real deal. Duke Tartan finds it hard to believe that Rayon is just a trainee because he's already mastered his steps and sword technique. As Rayon walks away, Prince Greer protests that he's not finished yet. As Lemaire tries to explain that the spar is over, Greer insists that he didn't use his full strength and would have gone all in from the start if he knew. While he's still talking, Marta calls him a effing loser because he's whining instead of acknowledging his loss. She adds that he reminds her of another loser she knows, referring to Warren. When Prince Greer recognizes her as the warrior who fought as the vanguard, she says she can't help but speak harshly, and he can pack his crap and get the heck out if he's not ready to get cussed. Her statements rile up Idalia, who asks her what audacity she has to speak to royalty in that manner, but Marta spells it out that she's a member of the main family, and he has nothing on her. Lemaire quickly settles their headbutting and asks Rayon if he would like to have a rematch. Rayon's response is that the outcome of the fight has been decided, especially since there was a wager on the fight, and there's no reason to continue to keep fighting. Out of nowhere, Prince Greer acknowledges his loss, especially because he failed to discern Rayon's ability and dismissed him before they even began their match. Greer expresses that he's ashamed of his own behavior and rips his sword, pleading with Rayon to fight him once more because he'll regret it for the rest of his life if he leaves like this. After he pleads some more, Rayon is taken aback by his humility when he had merely thought he was an arrogant prince, so he decides to accept his offer to fight once more. They soon get ready to fight again, and it's clear to Greer that he failed because he recognized the powerful opponent he was up against. This time he decides to go all in and releases a strange outburst of aura. The outburst surprises Rayon and even Marta, who didn't know prior that he carried so much potential. Despite Duke Tartan's protest against the prince using the stance, Greer decides to go ahead because he wants to fight with everything he has. As if on cue, Wrath comes to taunt Rayon on his inability to recognize that his opponent was hiding his strength. Meanwhile, Rayon looks unfazed, certain that he can still win. When Wrath calls Bull, they both have a wager where Rayon gets +4 points if he defeats the third prince, who now has a greater aura and more developed physique, but gains 10 points of Wrath's rage if he loses. The boys soon begin sparring, and Prince Greer dashes forward to land the first attack. The attack is so fierce that both fighters' swords and auras crash into one another in a frenzy. The resulting explosion is so great that it covers the field of vision of the onlookers. The fight continues fiercely, and it dawns on the prince that Rayon is not losing any ground even though he's fighting him with his full strength. Eventually, he decides to put all his energy into one defining strike and starts to draw all his energy into his sword. Rayon immediately recognizes the technique as the Perez sword technique that's only passed down to the future of the kingdom of Owen. From the energy emanating from Greer, it's clear that it's his finishing move, and he must be planning everything into his next strike. Because he's also stubborn, Rayon decides to meet him fire for fire. So far, Rayon has managed to memorize all the moves that the prince has performed. He decides to use the Million Flames Art's first technique, the spin step, which surprises Prince Greer. The fiery golden aura makes Greer quickly respond before he's hit. Both fighters advance toward each other, one with a fiery aura and another with an ice-like force. As they reach the middle of the field, their swords and auras clash. Somehow Greer manages to push his opponent's aura back, and he's certain that he's stronger. Rayon, on the other hand, seems to be having a harder time with this next round. Regardless, he doesn't give up and pushes back with another loud strike. The strike is so strong that Greer's sword shatters upon impact. To his dismay, even his aura is pushed back, and Rayon dashes behind him and lands his strike. Once again, the prince crashes to his knees, and Rayon is announced as the winner. In his crouched position, the prince can't believe his eyes because he was certain that he had the advantage in strength and speed. Oddly, with a smile on his face, he realizes that Rayon must have a step technique to be able to counter his aura. This loss makes Prince Greer realize that the saying that the world is vast is a true one. He walks up to Rayon and thanks him for helping him learn so much from their second match, and acknowledges his loss this time. Rayon responds warmly, stating that he's also learned a lot too, and Prince Greer apologizes for being dismissive at first. When Greer learns that he's only 14 years old, it amuses him that he lost in technique and attitude to a swordsman younger than he is. Out of nowhere, Prince Greer hands Rayon the golden medallion around his neck. Rayon is hesitant to receive it, but the prince insists, explaining that this is proof that he will grant any request that he makes of him, regardless of what it may be. Rayon wonders why the prince would give him something so valuable, and Greer explains that the match helped him get his mind clearer and has brought him to a realization. It makes him fortunate to lose to a swordsman like him. As Prince Greer leaves, he wishes Rayon good luck and says he'll enjoy working towards being as good as he is. Since they were defeated, Greer informs Lemaire that the wager goes to him as discussed. Meanwhile, in Rayon's past life, it was expected of him to complete his missions without receiving anything in return, and it's a bit abnormal for him to receive things like this. It's clear that his new life won't be going the way he predicted either. Later that day, Prince Greer shares the lessons he learned from the spar with Lord Glen. Apparently, he had thought of himself to be at the pinnacle, but Raon has helped him rethink his assumption because Raon was the image of a fully fledged warrior. Even though the prince had visited 3 of the 6 lords and took part in sparring, he's never seen a trainee on the level of Rayon, and he had much to learn from him. In fact, he plans to quickly return to the kingdom of Owen to put to work the lessons he learned from the spars. His words intrigue Lord Glen, who eventually asks him to inform the king of Owen that he received the letter that was sent by his hand. Shortly after, the prince and his envoy return to their kingdom. On their way, Duke Tartan refers to how Prince Greer used the power that he had hidden, as well as how the Perry's sword art may have been a bit excessive for the situation because it would have been better to keep some of it hidden. Oddly, the prince agrees, and Tartan also disagrees with the fact that he gave Rayon the token. Prince Greer doesn't agree with that part, especially because Rayon was very gracious to him even after he had rudely dismissed him, and it was necessary to reciprocate such courtesy. Pointing out Rayon's display, which was on the level of a special technique, the prince reveals that his gift was an investment of sorts. The surprised Duke asks him what he means by an investment, and the prince points out that Rayon will surely become a warrior whose name will be known throughout the continent if he can display this level of power and fortitude at such a young age, even if he's a member of the Branch family. From the prince's point of view, making a connection with someone like that could serve favorably in the future, and the young prince's ability to see so far ahead in the future in such a short time intrigues Duke Tartan. The prince responds that he doesn't deserve to live if he's unable to make such straightforward calculations, when he's spent so much time in the palace and has gleaned from the wisdom of the king. As they continue their journey, Prince Greer can't help but wonder how much Rayon would have grown by the next time they meet. Meanwhile, in the main building, Lord Glen's butler, Leon, remarks that it seems the lord is happy that a prince from another nation acknowledged his grandson, but the master rebuffs that he's talking nonsense. Leon points out the warm smile on his face, which hasn't been seen in a long time, and developed after Prince Greer mentioned Master Rayon's name. Nonetheless, the Lord claims that Leon must be getting old and mistaken. His response amuses Leon, who quickly redirects the conversation to the message that Duke Tartan delivered, so as to avoid probing further. Apparently, Duke Tartan had come earlier with an urgent message for the Northern Lord of Destruction, in addition to the letter Prince Greer presented. The message is said to have come directly from His Royal Highness Lacroix Albert du Owen II, the King of Owen and the Sword King of Silence of the 6 Lords. The message from Lord Lacroix is that the 5 Umbrae have begun to make their move. Sometime later, at the 5th training grounds, the trainees are praised for doing well in their last spar with the knights from the Kingdom of Owen. Because of their success, Lemaire gauges that they're ready and announces that they're going to be doing a special training next week. The students are curious about what the special training entails, but Lemaire informs them beforehand that it's not easy enough to really be considered training, because they'll be going into the field. Apparently, this field training will require them seeing blood. They'll be going a little beyond Sieghart's southern territory into a bandit stronghold called Snow Tiger Point. The bandits are semi-associated with the North-South Alliance and survive off the small toll they collect from the mountain pass. However, their behavior has become more overbearing lately. There have been increased reports of merchants having their merchandise stolen and of casualties. When they hear the report, the students suppose their mission is to clean out the brigands from the area, but they soon find out that their mission is something more intense. They're soon informed that the bandits attacked a village to the south of their hideout and massacred everyone, set the village on fire, and ran away. Because of that, their new mission is to track the Snow Tiger bandits and annihilate them. so they don't become complacent. Lemaire adds that they're famed to be aura users, even though they're bandits. Lemaire informs them to ensure they get ready because they'll be heading out the next day. That evening, Runan does some practice with the sword. Her plan was to hone her form a little before they depart, but it doesn't seem to be going as well as she'd like. She recalls that Rayon's stab was smooth and relaxed, and she doesn't seem to be able to replicate that no matter how much she tries. When she recalls that Raon would still be busy in the training room, it occurs to her that she can go and ask him. Instead of going, she decides against bothering him and chooses to keep trying on her own. After some time of practicing, her movements get smoother, so she decides to stop there. Before she goes home, she decides to say bye to Rayon, whom she is sure must still be practicing. She soon recalls that her mother had asked her to come home early this week because she'll have orb ice cream ready, so she decides to go home early and ask Rayon her questions early the next day. On her way home, someone approaches her from behind. Runan is surprised to see the person, whom she refers to as Syria, and she doesn't look too excited to see him after a long time. The man's name is Syria Sleorn of the Vassal House. He notices her sour expression, and jokingly asks her why she's looking so sour after not having seen her big brother for a long time, which hurts his feelings. When he repeats to her that he doesn't like her expression, Runan begins to tremble. Eventually, he notes her splendid strength, which was faster than what he expected, and points to the fact that Lemaire's decent enough at training. Syria says he's proud of her, but that doesn't mean she'll be going out in the field or putting her life on the line in a spar. His warm expression soon turns into a gloomy one, so he pushes her to the ground and jokes that she seems to have slipped. To teach her a lesson, he reminds her of the chipmunk she used to raise called Ruby. In reality, he brings out a chipmunk and reminds her about how Ruby died, and what happens if she goes against his words. To Runan's dismay, he crushes the chipmunk in his hands, and that clearly affects Runan's psyche. The terrible act brings back very terrible memories for Runan, causing her to cave in, and Syria takes advantage of her mental breakdown and tells her she's his. He insinuates that until the day arrives when he comes to take her for himself, she mustn't do anything dangerous or difficult and must ensure she exists until he decides otherwise. Memories of dead chipmunks flash across Runan's mind, and she recalls how Syria used to taunt her with such animal brutality years ago when they were younger. At the present moment, the same thing is happening again, and the nauseating feeling from her past causes her to shriek. As her big brother takes in and enjoys her pain, an explosion suddenly occurs nearby, releasing smoke. The interruption catches Syria's attention, while Runan keeps quivering in fear. Soon after, Rayon shows up between her and her brother with a sword in his hands. Shocked, Rayon asks Syria what he is. Syria seems unfazed and remarks to Rayon that it's polite to first introduce himself before demanding to know his name after appearing out of the blue. Clearly, Rayon doesn't believe he deserves such a right after accosting someone in an alley and supposes that he may be a thief or a mugger. His suppositions annoy Syria, who twitches for a little while and explains that he's neither a robber nor a stranger, but is Runa's older brother. Unsure of the situation, Rayon glances over at Runan but still finds her quivering, and it doesn't add up that Syria is truly her older brother. Syria, on the other hand, claims to have made a little joke because he was happy to see her after a long time, which caused her to react like that. Unknown to him, Rayon had seen the sick act of popping the chipmunk in his hands, which he refers to as a joke, and Syria claims that it's just a toy. To prove his point, Syria shows his clean hands and claims that there's no blood, but Rayon figures out that he had actually burned up flesh and blood with his aura. Apparently, Syria will be leaving on a long-term assignment and won't be back for a while, so he drops a dessert on the ground for Runan before he leaves. The psycho comments on the fact that Runan has made a very good friend and says he hopes their friendship lasts a long time. After apologizing for the prank he pulled, he takes his leave and says he'll see her later. Meanwhile, Rayon recognizes Syria from his past life as the swordsmanship prodigy of the Sleorn family, and one of the 12 titans anticipated to be the next generation of the continent's pinnacle. He's popularly known as the Spear and the Sword. Apparently, Rayon had only heard his name from his past life, but meeting him now discloses that he's a psycho who acts the part of a benevolent hero. The experience gives him a nauseating stench that reminds him of Darius. Finally, our boy helps Runan up and promises to escort her to her carriage. After he drops her off at her carriage, she thanks him for walking with her, and he advises her not to stay up late since they'll be leaving tomorrow. That night, Runan opens the box her brother left for her, and it turns out that the box is filled with orb ice cream. The ice cream doesn't seem to please her because she only whimpers that her brother has returned and nothing has changed. Years ago, her pet Ruby had hurt her because she was sensitive when she was having her babies, but it riles up Syria, even though she had tried to explain to him. Despite her defense, Syria killed her pet, claiming that she's his and cannot be allowed to get hurt. He was so controlling that he would instruct that she's not allowed to get hurt but only allowed to breathe. He'd even threatened to kill everyone if she told her mother and father, because he didn't need the family, and he'd set everyone on fire, sparing only her. Her constant fear was that someone would get hurt if she opened her mouth, so she decided to live quietly. To her, everything would be fine as long as she kept quiet. Eventually, this life made her live like a loner and suffer quietly. However, she came to learn that she wasn't the only one who was lonely after she came to know Raon Sieghart. After she came to understand the kind of person he is, how hard he works, the difficult times he went through, and how he changed how others viewed him through pure effort, it got her to believe that she could change. That's the reason she's been trying her hardest to change along with him. But it seems to her that she can't do that after all. The next day, the trainees head to the southernmost point of the Sieghart village, to the Zartan village. After coming in through a portal, they soon reach an area where Lemaire informs them they'll be spending the night. Apparently, they had left the training center and gone through the portal in a rush, so they're all told to get plenty of sleep because this is the last time they'll rest before they begin their mission. Shortly after, they're directed to their lodgings by one of the locals. When they settle, Raon thanks Wrath for giving him the hint about Syria's malicious presence, since he wouldn't have otherwise noticed because Syria was intentionally hiding his presence. Wrath responds that it's nothing for the girl who gave them orb ice cream. Since Syria had said his mission was long-term, it's clear that he won't be showing up for a while. But the fact that he's her older brother makes him worried that Runan won't be able to recover. Wrath's immediate solution to the conundrum is that Raon hand over his body to them so they can kill Syria and give it back. Although Wrath is sincerely trying to repay the favor that Runan did them by giving them orb ice cream, Raon still refuses to hand over his body. Because Syria has traumatized Runan, our boy figures that just killing Syria won't do much. Runan was the first in either of his lives put together to treat him with thoughtful consideration, so he's ready to kill Syria himself if anything happens to her. On the second day since leaving the Sieghart territory, the team arrives on the site that the Snow Tiger bandits attacked. The kids are horrified by the scenery of burnt dead bodies littered all over the place, and they can't stomach the thought that someone would do such a thing to innocent folks. It's an abominable sight, and even the strongest among them, like Warren, look gloomy. Apparently, the bandits slit their victim's throat before burning them alive. However, Raon seems to notice that Marta isn't reacting to the dead bodies like everyone else, and it's either she's seen a lot of corpses or she's killed someone firsthand. Suddenly, Raon realizes that Runan is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, she's in another part of the site staring at the dead body, trying to stifle the urge to vomit due to the sight. On the other side, Lemaire rounds up the boys and reminds them that the bastards who call themselves Snow Tigers did this. He had especially let them see the sight so they don't let their guard down when they go toe-to-toe with them. The kids are also given a silent whistle that doesn't make a noise when blown into, but can be detected by their instructors, who will come to help them out of any danger they're in upon hearing the sound. They're reminded to expect no mercy from the bandits and try to do all they can before they have to rely on the whistle. Runan flinches as she hears Liamir announce that they're to take the bandits' heads without hesitation if the opportunity ever comes. Raon is tasked with the job of breaking them into groups, so he puts Marta in charge of Group A, Warren in charge of Group B, and each group with about 3 or 4 people. Meanwhile, thoughts about what her brother said about how she belongs to him, and how she's not allowed to do anything dangerous or get hurt, keep resonating through Runan's mind. His threat has always been that anything that dares to hurt her will die at his hand, and the thought of defying him to go into this mission starts to mess with her. Raon soon comes to draw her out of her deep thoughts so they can group up together, and she hesitantly agrees. Raon considers advancing up to the peak of Mount Luton, which gives a clear view of the land below because of its elevation and makes it easy to retreat or hide, making it an ideal location for the bandits to hide. But he knows they probably won't be hiding there because it's so ideal, and there's no way they picked such an obvious place when they know they're being hunted on such a large scale. Considering that, it leaves the hills right behind them, and he chooses that spot as the place for him and Runan to go instead of heading into the forests like the other groups. Her sudden propensity to become easily startled worries Raon, so Wrath suggests that he say something to her. Raon, on the other hand, doesn't know what to say to her, especially because it's a family matter, and he's yet to even clarify how he feels about having a mother in the new life, not to mention interfering in another person's family. Regardless, he plans to find an opportunity to resolve what Syria did to Runan, even though it's going to be hard to find such an opportunity. After they make their way up the hills, they find another forest between the hills that can't be seen from the outside, just like Raon had suspected, and it seems like someone had intentionally made it difficult to find signs of life. It would have been harder to notice if Raon was a newbie, but it's clear that they don't stand a chance since he basically tracked down people for a living. The bandits' ploy to hide themselves may work on a hunter or an ordinary tracker, but Raon senses that the Snow Tiger bandits' hideout is nearby. As the two of them advance forward, they run into some traps and several footprints far into the hills, expecting that no one would come so far in to look for them after they cleaned up their tracks in the outskirts. Their only mistake was that they looked down on the type of people they expected to be sent to come looking for them. Right in front of them is the entrance of their hideout. In front of the cave, they spot a detained child that looks like a hostage, standing with two well-built guards. The two guards seem to be low-ranked because they don't seem to have any aura, but there's a stronger guard with him, while the rest of the bandits must be inside the cave. At this rate, there could be about 20 bandits inside the cave, so Rayon considers retreating to blow the whistle so they can surprise them after they regroup. However, because the child with the guards doesn't look so well, and he looks like he's going to die of hypothermia, it seems like he won't last until they come back with reinforcements. Rayon decides that the best course of action is to rescue the hostage and take care of the guards in front quietly. When Runan hesitates, Rayon tries to get her to focus on him, and he assures her that they can rescue the child. But he needs her help. The plan is for her to silence the area with her mana when he gives the signal, while he takes care of the rest. Runan still seems distracted, wondering if it's possible for her to change, but she decides to give this a shot. They wait for a while until the guards become tired and distracted. Then Rayon gives the signal, and Runan steps out in front of them to silence the area using mana. While the guards are confused about who she is, she uses her aura dispersion and silences every voice around them. The guards soon realize that their voices aren't going far, and they wonder what someone using aura is looking for in the hideout. Spotting his opening, Rayon dashes towards the two guards in front before the more skilled swordsman among them can react. With one strike, he kills the first two and moves past them. One thing he doesn't account for is that Runan still can't handle the sight of gore. The sight of the guards being killed triggers the memories of how her brother used to brutalize her pets when she was much younger, and it causes her to scream, breaking the sound barrier. Things aren't looking well because the sound barrier has been shattered. Runan is basically a broccoli, still horrified from the sight, and they're about to be discovered. In a split second, the swordsman goes for Runan's head, clearly because she looks like the weaker one, and Rayon is left to fight on his own. Before he can reach her, Rayon manages to reach him and push him to the ground. He threatens to pluck out a bone every time he speaks out of turn, and demands that he answers the questions he asks him. Suddenly, Rayon notices the sound barrier is back up, and he glances back at Runan, who is still trembling with fear, and he's proud that she's able to stick to the mission, even though she was struck by crippling fear. As Runan rescues the little boy, Rayon confirms that they're indeed the Snow Tiger Bandit and learns there are about 39 of them, with a few others deep in the forest. True to his suspicions, he also learns that they have one other hostage inside the cave. The little boy they rescued suddenly reveals that the other hostage in the cave is his little sister, and he begs them to save her. Touched with compassion, Runan promises him they'll save his sister. Meanwhile, Rayon doesn't think it's wise to make such big promises when they're clearly outnumbered. When Runan suggests they call for backup, Rayon agrees, and she blows the silent whistle. True to what Lemaire had said, the whistle is so silent that even Rayon can't hear it. The only problem is that someone in the cave hears it and alerts the others that their pursuers are here to get them. Rayon is surprised that someone far inside the cave can pick up the sound when he couldn't hear it from nearby. Not long after, several armed men come out of the cave and wonder what little kids like them are looking for so far away. To stop the men from launching an attack, our boy quickly holds the man he was questioning hostage. The men who picked up the sound, who appear to be their leader, ask Rayon who he called with the silenced whistle. Rayon doesn't give him any answer, but insists that he wants to exchange hostages. He asks for the little girl in exchange for the girl they're holding, but the man laughs, expressing that he doesn't care what happens to the person with them since he's not worth much, unlike the hostage with them. The bandit leader threatens him to put down his sword if he doesn't want the little girl's head on the ground, and it seems like the kids are backed into a corner. When Rayon realizes they're trying to play with him, he asks Runan to turn around so she doesn't see what he's about to do and to only move at his signal. Suddenly, Rayon slits the throat of the guy he's holding and spills the blood on their faces. The men don't expect the sudden turn of events, and before they can respond, Rayon throws his sword past them and towards the guy holding the little girl. As the sword pierces through his chest, our boy quickly signals to Runan to activate a snow mist using her aura. As Runan quickly creates the mist, a snow-filled mist covers up the entire area and obscures their field of vision. As the men scurry around to see through the mist, Rayon quickly finds the little girl and carries her to safety. After the mist clears shortly, the men realize that the little girl and the kids are missing. The bandits are desperate to find the little girl, so they frantically look around, with the intent to kill on sight. Meanwhile, in some other part of the hill, Rayon and Runan carry the kids to safety. The kids soon pass out due to the cold, making it hard for them to escape. Also, there's a large chance that the bad guys won't be there if they leave and will go attack another village. So Rayon decides that it's better if they deal with them right there. He asks Runan to stay back to protect the kids, but she's disturbed by the fact that he sustained a bleeding cut on his arm. As usual, he acts macho and says he'll be right back, but he feels someone holding him back by his cloth. It turns out to be Runan, who pleads that he doesn't go because it's dangerous to fight while injured. She pleads that they should wait for the instructors, who must be on their way after hearing their whistle, and Rayon realizes she's scared. He empathizes with her fear, but he explains that it's much worse to be so scared that they can't do anything. He reminds her that those bastards have committed a terrible crime, and they owe it to every victim of the village, even to those who tried to defend their village and protect their loved ones to the end, to do something. Another thing he reminds her of is that they still have a few people alive to protect. Finally, he finds an opening to talk about her traumatic experience with her brother. Acknowledging that he doesn't really know what her brother did to her, he explains that the more she fears her brother, the greater the fear will become, and that fear will drag her around forever if she keeps running away. She listens quietly, as he makes her understand that she's the only one who can protect herself and the ones she loves. Rayon lets her know that where she goes from here lies in her hands, and hands her something he had kept in his coat. As she watches him walk away towards the bandit hideout, tears fill her eyes as she thinks about the things he said. She really does want to change and escape the grip of this fear. She really doesn't want to be entangled in her past any longer, and she wants to protect what's precious to her, and she agrees that she can't stay stuck in such darkness any longer. As the tears continue to stream down her face, she uncovers the toy chipmunk that Rayon put in her hands, and it gives her strength to want to step forward into the light. Not long after, a massacre begins inside the cave as Rayon slices through the bad guys like chopped onions. Their boss orders the rest of them to bring his head quickly, but he's killing them so fast that they can't wrap their heads around how one brat could cause this much damage. As one ambitious guy lunges toward Rayon from behind, he quickly dodges the attack, but the leader takes advantage of the commotion to land his own finishing blow. The attack is so strong that it shatters the ground Rayon is standing on, but to the boss's dismay, our boy pulled a Houdini on him. As he scurries around looking for him, Rayon appears behind him and asks if all he's going to do is look for openings to attack instead of fight head-on. With one swing of the sword, the boss's head leaves his body. The rest of the bandits are scared to death, and they can't wrap their heads around the fact that such a young boy would be able to carry such monstrous power. Rayon suggests that they surrender since their leader is kaput, but a sudden attack from behind alerts him to the fact that the white-haired guy he just took out wasn't the leader. The leader, Vakan, soon emerges, wondering why they're finding it so hard to deal with one little twerp, and wonders if they'll ever really make it into something called the North-South Alliance with such terrible skills. Vakan jokingly notices the classy air on Rayon's face and in his outfit, figuring that his family must be well off. As he lunges forward to land his attack, the man is glad that he'll be able to get enough gifts from their families since his plan is to take them as hostages too. This guy seems to carry much more power as his attack manages to push Rain to the ground. It's clear that the true lord of the Snow Tiger bandits is a real swordsman. While the commotion is going on, another bandit announces that he's found the girl and the hostages. Outside, Runan, who is still trembling, tries to defend herself from the bandit. She's clearly not in any state to fight, so Rayon worries that he has to go help her. The switch in his attention annoys Vakan, who insists that he's not going anywhere but will stay there to play with him. It's clear that Rayon can't help Runan out without dealing with this guy first. Meanwhile, the bandit outside continues to hurl curses at Runan, especially because he can't use aura and doesn't understand it either. He insults her by saying it's obvious she's never cut down a person before, so he tries to pressure her to hand over the hostages and stop playing around. The guy is pretty serious with his threat, and he dashes toward her to draw blood. Runan figures out that she'll have to fight the foe in front of her to defend the kids. Fortunately, he's not a difficult opponent, so she assures herself that she can cut him down. As she has some positive confessions about what Rayon said, a vision of her elder brother flashes in front of her during the heat of the battle, enthralling her once more. The memory of her brother intrudes into her psyche, and although she knows she has to shake it off, she can't seem to forget how terrified she was on that day. The memory makes her doubt if she can really be like Rayon and defend what she cares about, especially when she can't even swing her sword properly in a situation like this. A strong fear grips her, and she wonders how someone like her, who's never protected anything, can possibly do something. A loud shout of her name suddenly drags her out of her mind, and she glances over her shoulder to see Rayon fighting with Vakan. He glances over at her and assures her that she can protect them. His words cause tears to pour down her eyes again, and the dark place she runs into in her mind suddenly becomes enlightened by Rayon's assuring tone. All of this happens in a split second, and she confidently turns back to her assailant, who seems to be moving at 0.5x speed. A feeling of gratitude wells up in her heart toward Rayon, who has given her courage, and she uses that courage to slice through the invasive vision of her elder brother. At that moment, the bandit inches toward her, and she slices his stomach with one swing. Inside of her, she's eternally grateful to Rayon for believing in her. Meanwhile, Vakan is surprised that his man was easily defeated by a twerp like that, and he complains that there's no decent fighter among them. Him calling Runan a twerp annoys Rayon, who responds negatively and informs him that Runan overcame her difficult past with her own 2 hands, which means she has a stronger and purer heart than anyone. He takes the chance to activate his Million Flames art, and he dashes past the man and cuts him, using a move known as the Flower Rain. After they take out their enemies, Rayon decides to check around to see if there are any more traps in the area before the instructors show up. But he runs into a rare elixir known as the Two-Tone Flower, which the bandits seem to have murdered an entire village over. Out of nowhere, someone shows up behind them and asks if the fight is already over. This mysterious new guy also seems to know about the Two-Tone Flower and about Vakan, and he cheerfully asks Rayon if he took them all out. This guy is from the North-South Alliance and is the Eternity Bandit Lord Lecter. Obviously, Rayon doesn't trust this guy and asks him what his deal is. Lecter just laughs at his boldness and guesses that his boldness must be coming from how powerful he is. Still suspicious, Rayon asks him if he's from the North-South Alliance, and Lecter affirms that. In Rayon's past life, he has heard about this Lecter guy, who is a genius swordsman who took a single sword into the North-South Alliance and became the leader of a great fortress of his own in 10 years. Unlike these Snow Tiger bandits, this guy is a real warrior. Meanwhile, Lecter quickly sizes them up and recognizes that they're descendants of a renowned house, and a direct one from one of the 6 lords. He even guesses that they're from the Sieghart house, and he recognizes that they must be trainees since they lack the flame sword emblem. Confused about what to do next, the guy considers whether to kill the both of them. Before he does anything, Lecter releases a storm of aura. Rayon thinks he's a prick because he's showing off his killing aura, but he doesn't realize that our boys lived a life as assassins, so it has to be more than this to affect him. The fact that Rayon can withstand his killing aura amuses Lecter. Meanwhile, Rayon figures that he could kill him if he had stealthily tried to assassinate him, but there's very little chance that he could defeat him head-on with his current strength. Nonetheless, our boy doesn't feel like backing off, so he draws his blade for battle and tells his opponent to do the same. Lecter is amused and reminds Rayon that he'll die if he faces him, but Rayon agrees that it's the obvious way of the world that the weak will die. His words further amuse Lecter, who wonders what kind of kid says odd things like that. Suddenly, Rayon's determined spirit makes the guy change his mind about fighting, and he believes it'd be a shame to kill him here. When Rayon responds that a warrior doesn't choose the time or place for his death, his words further amuse Lecter, who wonders if he's been reading books of quotes and doubts if he's truly a kid. Lecter also reveals that his amusing speech isn't the only reason he's backing off today, but also because a fierce wind has been watching for a while now. What he means by a fierce wind doesn't make any sense to Rayon, but the guy soon jumps away and asks Rayon what his name is. Rayon confidently tells him his name, and Lecter says that he's eagerly awaiting the day his name sounds throughout Mount Turkin and Raviel River, then suddenly disappears out of sight. Our boy soon decides that they need to quickly take the kids and leave the premises, to which Runan agrees. Before they leave, Runan asks him if she did well out of nowhere. The question comes as a surprise to Rayon, who cheerfully tells her that she was the best. For the first time in a long time, Runan smiles. They soon return to the camp with the head of the Snow Tiger bandit leader, which made Warren and Marta outraged that they'd fallen behind again and missed out on the action. But Liamir tries to reassure them that it was a team effort. Liamir tries to tell the kids about his own first mission to distract them, and this triggered Wrath, who is always cocky, to narrate how he also froze an entire palace solid in his first battle, which is far greater than what Liamir achieved. The Slorn house later agreed to take in the children that were rescued since they're now orphans, and it seems to have been influenced by a liking that Runan took to the kids. After they all returned home, Runan and Rayon were summoned by Lord Glenn, who gave them both a bronze medallion in recognition of their role in the mission. The Lord even praises them, which surprises Rayon, and goes as far as allowing Rayon to keep the two-tone flower that he got in the battle to himself. After that, it seems like everything went smoothly. The only odd part is when Rayon gets home and finds Dorian coming out of the annex. When he asks what he's looking for, Dorian informs him that Lady Sylvia had asked him to come over after the mission to give a summary of what had happened during the mission. That doesn't sit well with Rayon because he clearly doesn't want his mother to know he had murdered several people just that day. Meanwhile, he finds out that Dorian, who is always as imperceptive as ever, told her every little detail of what happened. When he steps in, he's met by Helen and his frantic mother, so he begins to stammer to defend himself before they say anything, because he's certain that he won't hear the last of it if his mother knows that he went out and killed the bandits on his own. Before he can even explain anything, Sylvia just asks him to hug her and assures him that he did so well. Her response surprises him, and Sylvia can tell that he thinks he's going to get into trouble from the expression on his face. She tells him about how the founder of the Siegharts raised his blade to defend the weak, and the Siegharts continued to protect the weak after that. Apparently, Sylvia's goal used to be to become a swordsman with the mindset of the original Siegharts, so she explains that she would never scold him for risking his life to rescue hostages. Much to Rayon's surprise, the two ladies express how proud they were after hearing the story, and Helen even announces that she'll brag about it in the main house. Their response still doesn't make any sense to Rayon, and he just sums it all up to the complications of human emotion. Regardless, he plans to tear Dorian a new one for his loud mouth. Meanwhile, at Runan's home, she plays with the doll that Rayon had given her on the battlefield, and the memory tied to it amuses her. All that goes through her mind is how she's going to thank Rayon for what he did for her the next time she sees him. At the training center, Liamir reminisces on the events of the day, and it turns out that he had hidden behind the boulder during Rayon's altercation with Lecter and had been listening in. The memory causes a smile to develop on his face, especially because it's been a long time since he felt the way he felt about the Master. To him, it seems like the seed of the new king has begun to sprout. Sometime later, at the main estate of House Robert, Lord Darris is seen writing in a book. While he's writing, he notices blood leaking out of an open wound in his hand, and wonders why the wound he got from his altercation with Rayon years ago is yet to heal. At this point, it's been 17 years since he took out Rayon. Although he has consumed elixir after elixir of high quality, summoned skilled physicians and renowned priests, no one has still been able to erase the sword mark. For some reason, the wound neither heals nor worsens. It's almost as if the wound remains in the same state as it was first caused, to make him remember the events of that day. It seems to him that Rayon's dead spirit wants to be remembered, but Darris refuses to dwell on the past. In other news, it's only a short time until Darris's life desire becomes realized. Meanwhile, the system notifies Rayon that a strand of the Curse of Bitter Frost has disappeared, and his Million Flames technique has reached 3 stars, as well as his Chill of Bitter Frost quality. The sense of the snowflower he received during a wager with Wrath has also increased to 3 stars, as has his fire resistance, and he's reached Sword Expert, even though it's just the beginner level. Some other things that have increased include the speed of his aura usage, all skill stats, his sword arts proficiency, and his walk technique proficiency. It gladdens his heart that he's finally reached the level of expert in his swordsmanship, even though it's at the beginner level. Wrath decides to spoil his show as usual by claiming even swordmasters are mere bugs to him, which is far greater than the lesser sword expert he's achieved. Rayon retorts that it's rare for a 15-year-old to reach expert level, even in the entire continent. But Wrath continues his bad-mouthing about how weakness is considered weakness, regardless of one's age. Surprisingly, Rayon agrees with him completely, and is glad that he at least acknowledges the fact that he's growing, but that just infuriates Wrath further, who claims he'll never acknowledge a mere human. Upon noticing the slight tremor in Wrath's voice, Rayon senses that something is wrong and tries to pry into the spirit's mind, and that kind of insolence still makes Wrath mad because he's offended that a mere human would try to see through his royalty. When Wrath threatens to devour him as usual, Rayon jokingly reminds him to regain his strength like when he was in the demon world, so he doesn't devour him instead. Talking about Wrath's past triggers another walk down memory lane as Wrath begins to narrate how lesser demons used to come to his castle to start fights. When he realizes where this is going, Rayon quickly exempts himself and goes to stretch. Sometime later, inside the training hall, Lemaire abruptly stops the training for that day because he has to head out, while protesting that they should have 20 extra minutes of training since Lemaire was 20 minutes late that day. Regardless of the accusation, Lemaire dismisses them and offers to do that tomorrow, and that makes Warren see him as an irresponsible elf. After they wrap up, Rayon reminds those on chore duty to begin cleaning up the training room. Shortly after, Dorian, who is on chore duty, prepares to get to work. Marta's appearance soon startles him, making her wonder if he's screaming so badly because he was paired to clean with her. Even though he claims that's not it and it's an honor to clean with her, she's not buying it. After bullying some other kids out of the training hall so she can get to her cleaning duties, it's clear that Rayon is the only one she's well behaved towards. Lemaire appears again and notes the same thing, and he's back because he forgot to tell them something extremely important. When they gather together, the students learn that they've received their second mission, and the entire room goes dead silent. It's been half a year since their first mission, and for Rayon, that's too much time to spend without being assigned another mission. Apparently, it seems that the orcs have appeared in the vicinity of a village called Cebu Village, to the southeast of Sieghart territory, and their mission is to head to Cebu Village and take care of the orcs to keep the village and its residents safe. Some of the trainees are excited by the sound of an orc raid, and they're glad because they can finally put their sword to the test like they've been waiting for. When Lemaire notices their happiness, he explains that they shouldn't be so hasty because their instructors won't be joining them this time, and they'll be heading to Cebu Village alone and must work together to complete the mission. The obvious question is what to do when they run into a situation that is beyond their power, and they're told that something they should have in their skill set is the ability to figure things out or to give up on a difficult mission and choose to return alive. He explains that this is why the leader's decision-making skills are so important, because they're the ones who have to read the situation and decide if they're going to go head-on, go stealthily, or run away to fight another day. Dorian asks to confirm if it's not against the rules to run away from the fight, and he's told that it's allowed depending on the conditions, as running into one of the 5 demon lords would be a dire condition, and the only thing Dorian can pick from this is the part that he won't be punished for running away from missions. It comes as a complete shock to them when they're told that they'll be leaving at dawn in the next 2 days. To the students, the urgency seems rushed, especially since the day is basically over and they technically just have one to prepare. Apparently, nothing can be done about it because monster raids need more urgent attention than other types of raids, and they're also informed that they can cause harm to the village if they don't prepare well. This infuriates Warren, who believes they would have been able to prepare more thoroughly if Lemaire had informed them sooner. Rayon soon quiets down their chattering, reminding them that their instructor has always told them to always be ready because they never know when they'll receive a mission, so he urges them to begin preparing immediately because they're losing time by arguing about it. His words resonate with several of the trainees, who decide that it's better to just get moving than worry over spilled beans, and his leadership abilities make Lemaire happy. The kids are also informed that orcs are fiercer and stronger than they'd anticipated, and they can't be compared to the opponents they've faced so far because of their huge statures. Because they also move in hordes, the trainees will also have to fight multiple opponents at the same time. Lemaire counsels that fighting them head-on won't be the best way to go, but fighting with a focus on dodging will be more advantageous since they've all learned the walk technique. 2 days later, at the training center, and on the morning they head out to the mission, Round notices that the Sieghart provided small bags enchanted with lightweight magic, which he feels is their way of saying they don't really care about them being too prepared for the mission. He's glad they're giving them a free hand to figure things out, because that's his style anyway. As usual, Wrath comes to taunt him about how arrogant he is by expecting everyone to pay attention to his needs, and Rayon taunts him right back about how he took stats from him a while ago. While they're bantering, there's a knock on the door. Rayon, who was certainly not expecting anyone, is surprised to see his mother at the door. She angrily glares at him and asks why he didn't come to the annex to inform her that he's going out on a mission. He's still surprised about how she found out and suspects that Dorian must have told her again. It turns out that it was Lemaire who told her this time and not Dorian, and it brings out a little contempt for his instructor. He promptly apologizes, but his mother only pouts in response. Eventually, she drops the hard act and squeezes his hands, explaining that being the leader of his fellow trainees isn't just a title to show off, but a position that requires him to lead them in a better direction. She says that he can't complete his missions on his own, and he has to position his cohorts in the most ideal locations in order to reduce the damage and complete the mission successfully together, because his decisions carry the weight of his cohorts' lives. At this point, Raon is confused because he was certain she came to scold him, but she now seems to be giving advice. She continues by saying that monster raids look easy but are difficult assignments that will require them to root them out completely without letting the villagers come to harm. She counsels that he consider himself a Sieghart warrior when on a mission and not as a trainee, aiming to follow the example of the founder of the Sieghart House, which is to be a warrior that protects others. When she finishes, he confesses that he expected her to be angry, and she agrees that she is, but she seems to be more worried than angry. To his surprise, she hugs him because this isn't an appropriate time to scold him, but informs him to prepare for an earful when he comes back. She expresses her happiness to see how much brighter he's become after beginning his training, even though she's always worried about him. All this kind of emotion is still a little bit strange to Rayon, but he eventually leans in and returns the hug. Before the trainees leave, they are informed that anything can happen outside the estate, and as such, they need to be alert and wary of everything. They're also told not to second-guess themselves and to rather retreat if they're ever overwhelmed. They're also told that the journey would usually take a month, but they'll be taking a path that should let them arrive in 2 weeks. Lemaire wishes them luck, and Rayon groups the trainees into formations that he had previously assigned to them. Lemaire is also certain that the kids can do this, not just because of Rayon's exceptional aura and martial battle sense, but because of his sense and ability to adapt, which will make the mission not so hard for them. While Rayon instructs the kids and leads Dorian to check for provisions and the health of the rest of the team, it's amusing to Lemaire that Rayon is just a 15-year-old boy, because he's never failed to heighten the expectations had for him. Unlike what Lemaire had told them, one of the instructors reminds Lemaire that they're supposed to be following the kids so they don't lose track of them because of the distance. It seems like he had just told them that, so they're not expecting any backup. Meanwhile, Lemaire tells the instructors to relax for a while because there's a trainee with exceptional senses among the kids. He even goes to take a nap, and the instructors begin to murmur amongst one another, worried if it's even acceptable to let the kids go on such a mission without following them closely. When he notices their tenseness, Lemaire tells the other instructors they should be worried about the orcs instead of worrying about the kids. Sometime later, in a very eerie-looking cave, the leader of a dangerous-looking group confirms the location of a village from one of his subordinates. Upon receiving confirmation that it's the right village, he instructs that they leave immediately for Cebu village and grants them permission to kill anyone who gets in their way. In a few days, the kids reach the forest neighboring Cebu village. Upon reaching there, the trainees run into Kine Sieghart, the top trainee of the 6th training ground and a member of the main family. They're surprised to see him and wonder what the 6th training ground is doing there, but Kane asks them the same question. Apparently, Kane had been injured and couldn't leave the infirmary for a while before joining the 6th training ground, but it seems like he's fully recovered. It also seems he's now an expert sword user. Finally, the 6th training ground leader tells them that they're headed to Cebu village to destroy the orcs, and he asks what they're doing in the forest. Raon informs him that they're headed to Cebu village for the same mission, and Kane wonders if they all received the same mission, especially since their unit didn't get a message about the other team before departing. Actually, the night before the departure, in a tavern in the suburbs, some of the trainers of the training grounds gather to have a chat. One person praises Lemaire on the accomplishments of his students in the last mission, defeating bandits at such a young age. Lemaire brags about how his students are amazing and how they should just send them into the orc subjugation mission that Lord Manor sent to him because he's sure they'd finish it up in no time and get him praise from the head of the house. Suddenly, the chief instructor of the 6th training ground, Maytoon, responds that they should let the 6th training ground tackle that mission because monster subjugation depends more on teamwork than individual strength, which the 5th training ground heavily relies on. Maytoon claims that the skills of all his students have improved after completing a program called Hell Week without anything falling behind, so he'll be sending out the 6th training ground for the mission. In response, Lemaire taunts him about how he must be feeling restless because his students have been getting all the attention lately, and suggests they send out both training grounds on the mission. That doesn't make any sense to Maytoon, but Lemaire explains that the village can't deal with the orcs, so it's best to send both teams to kill the monsters as fast as possible. So, if they send in both training grounds, they can compete with each other to see who can finish it as fast as possible. The suggestion pleases Maytoon, who proceeds to get permission from Lord Manor, who had sent in the mission in the first place. Both trainers look forward to the result of the mission with anticipation. Meanwhile, at the forest, Warren cockily informs Kane that there must have been a mix-up when the missions were issued and asks them to head back because the 5th training ground doesn't need their help for this mission. That offends Kane, who feels Warren's words only depict the blatant arrogance of the 5th training ground. Kine insists that cooperation is key in missions like this, and the 6th training ground is better suited for that than they are, especially because the mission will be too tough for them since they have no experience working together. In response, Warren acknowledges the strength of the 6th training ground, but claims that they're not worthy to look down on the 5th training ground's capabilities. Rayon, who just watches them argue, realizes that the chief instructors must have known that their missions would coincide, but it doesn't seem to make sense that they'd send them out without telling them about the mix-up. It's also clear that Lemaire is the kind of instructor who puts great importance on practical experience when training swordsmen, and this mission is a perfect task to give them real-life experience. However, monster subjugations require good teamwork and strategy, something that they still lack. So, it makes sense that Lemaire had intentionally made the 5th and 6th training grounds compete on the same mission to make them realize their shortcomings, especially because they've been gaining popularity within the house. Rayon soon realizes how much of a cunning elf their instructor is. It's also clear to him that it's best for their team to experience the advantage of cooperation. Another thing that keeps lingering in his mind is his mother's words to him about how she wants him to become a swordsman who protects others. Upon realizing this, he calms the two boys down and explains that there's no point in wasting precious time, especially when they know that neither of them will concede the mission to the other group. He suggests that the only middle ground they have is to battle each other for the mission, but Warren protests that's a waste of energy they'll need for the mission, especially when they don't know what will happen when the mission begins. However, since the 6th training ground has no intention of backing off, and they don't, Rayon speculates that there must be a large number of orcs to go around, and that means they can work together to perform the mission. The winner of the duel will lead the subjugation mission, while the losers assist the winners. He explains that they'll break the orcs' chain of command by killing their chief and proceed with subjugating them according to the mission. If the leading ground fails to deal with the orcs, the assisting ones will get a chance to complete the mission. Kine feels his explanation makes sense and agrees, so they proceed to fight each other at full force to decide on who leads. Shortly after, they change into their fighting gear. The winning condition is simple. One team can win by incapacitating all members of the opposing team or capturing their flag, which makes it simpler than sparring. When Raon tries to discuss strategy with his team, Marta, who's leading the vanguard, doesn't listen because she's certain that their opponents are small fry. She bursts out and asks them to sit back and watch her defeat them all. Moments later, she launches toward 3 of the opponents that are protecting the front and insists that she doesn't need mind games against weaklings. As usual, she charges with intense strength, while Raon tries to detect the environment using the heightened senses of his perception of the snowflower skill. While he's scanning the entire battlefield, Runan wonders if their team can really win without a strategy, and Raon explains that they wouldn't even listen if he tried to make one because they're overconfident in their abilities. When asked if they can win, he responds that Marta, Warren, and the other kids who stormed off in the first attack will certainly lose because it'll be a one-sided battle. True to his words, Marta struggles terribly to break through the opponent's defense, which seems to be too strong, even though it's just a pyramid formation. As the battle goes on in full force, the leader of the other team's vanguard reminds her that she's not the main character of this world, and, as such, shouldn't look down on their efforts. Much to Marta's surprise, the 5th training ground fighters are beaten, and they have to retreat to their side of the mountain. When the vanguard returns, Raon finally takes the chance to show them that it is much harder than they expected. He accuses them of self-delusion and presumptions that the world stopped changing while they trained. It's clear that the 5th Training Grounds kids looked down on them because they were beaten by the Owen Kingdom and were certain they'd win. He points out that this is the result of jumping into the fight without any strategy or teamwork, which even made them waste their aura and stamina just because they looked down on their opponents, who also train every single day. They all silently take the scolding, and Raon announces that there's still a chance they can win the competition. When Marta finally submits to listen, Raon likes the fire in her eyes, and he proceeds to show them the path to victory. Meanwhile, the trainees in the 6th Training Grounds Vanguard are surprised by how the 5th Training Ground isn't as big a deal as they've heard, but the leader among them reminds them not to let their guard down because the opposing team had recently exterminated the Snow Tiger group, who are affiliated with the Great South-North Union. While they chat, Marta shows up again, and the leader of the Vanguard aims to finish her off for good. Marta, cocky as usual, assures him that he'll get hurt if he keeps running his mouth, and she charges straight for them. The other team's Vanguard leader quickly directs his team to focus their aura to the front, but is soon shocked to see Marta attacking the side, which has a weak defense, instead of going toward the front. Meanwhile, Warren attacks another unit, and the other kids recognize that he's using the same posture and decide to use their previous defense strategy, only for Warren to corner them and knock them to the ground. The leaders of both vanguards in the 6th Training Ground are surprised by the sudden change in fighting style, which is opposite to what was used before. At the spot where Marta is attacking, she starts to gain the upper hand, and she realizes that Raon was right after all. Just moments before, Raon had asked them if they knew why they lost, even though they were more powerful overall and had more skilled individuals. They soon realize that they have no strategy, unlike the 6th Training Ground, who strategized before the match to deal with every single one of them by analyzing their combat potential, leading to their loss against a weaker opponent. Durain becomes worried that they'll lose again, and he's met with intense scolding by Marta, who tells him to shut his mouth because he shouldn't talk about defeat so easily. The truth is that some of them are already defeated, and the ones who aren't have lost a lot of stamina and aura, putting them on the disadvantaged side. However, Raon soon discloses his own strategy. Apparently, Kine Sieghart has highly developed vision and senses, and that's why he managed to figure out where Marta and Warren were heading and dispatch the trainees who could counter them to fight. Because Marta's attacks were simple despite her high strength, Kane dispatched swordsmen who could withstand her attacks to use up her aura. Also, since Warren's swordsmanship is quite straightforward, Kane dispatched swordsmen who could withstand his swings, making it hard for him to respond. The only way they can win against them seems to be swapping opponents, but since Marta and Warren won't accept that, Raon decides that they have to change the way they attack. When Marta seems confused, Raon explains that the group facing her has a sturdy sword formation, but isn't good enough at moving their aura around, which should create an opening that she can break through to attack if she opens her senses. Warren's swordsmanship is straightforward and weak against opponents who solely rely on their instincts. The only good part about such people is that they're prone to deception, so setting aside his usual style of fighting to deceive them will create an opening. Hearing him give his observations makes Marta and Warren wonder if he was watching their fights, since they know he was sitting here the whole time. Raon acknowledges Kane's advanced senses but declares that his own are much better. In the present time, Raon can sense that everyone on his team is doing well, and it doesn't look like they're going to lose. While he's alone, Kane appears from behind him, and it looks like they're the last parts to seal up the duel. Although the tide of the battle has changed, Kane was unable to find Rayon, and the only thing he could do was come to the location of the flag. Kane also easily figures out that the tide of the battle has changed because it seems that Rayon gave out some instructions to them, but he declares that he's going to end the battle there. He also knows about Rayon's fire attribute, but when he triggers his own fire attribute, Rayon is surprised because he didn't know Kane also uses the same attribute. After he does that, Kane boldly declares that his aura is the highest grade among the fire attributes, a quantity that surpasses most of the regular swordsmen, which Rayon can't win against. Meanwhile, Rayon also triggers his own fire aura and retorts that people in this house talk too much before a fight. Both leaders face each other squarely to get started on their own duel. Before they begin, Rayon promises to show Kane how his flame will devour his. In the twinkle of an eye, our boy dashes toward Kane at a ridiculous speed, surprising Kane with his speed and flame intensity. Although Kane is certain that Rayon's aura isn't as good as his own, he errs on the side of caution and jumps backward to avoid Rayon's strike, because he has heard that his flames were able to defeat Rayon and even the Prince of Owen. However, he's quite certain that he's more powerful, so he goes back in to fight fire with fire in a head-on attack. As both of their swords clash, a bright golden flame bursts out of Rayon's sword and encircles Kane, much to his surprise. He soon realizes there's trouble when the golden flames tear his face, and it doesn't make any sense to him that his flames are being devoured. To Kane, this shouldn't even be possible, but Rayon, who doesn't care for his whimpering, goes in further for a stronger attack to take him out. Kane manages to block the attack, but the impact of the aura is so strong that it results in a huge explosion on the field. After the smoke clears, Kane is seen on the ground while Rayon towers over him, sword in hand. When the other members of the team return, they're surprised to find Kane in their camp, and Rayon explains that he's here because he had planned to attack him since that's the easiest way to reverse the tide of the battle. They're surprised that Rayon was able to predict Kane's arrival, as well as the tips that he gave them that allowed them to win their individual battles, which they would have lost if they had done otherwise. Even Marta agrees that they won because of his instructions, and she would have stopped following his orders if they were bad. Once again, they all acknowledge him as the 5th Training Ground's top trainee and pledge to obey his orders in the future without complaint. Rayon is glad to see that they've grown in such a short time, and he agrees that this is the ideal way the 5th training should be. Finally, he addresses everyone on doing a good job and reminds them that the lesson of the day is the dangers of being absorbed in groundless pride and arrogance that causes one to act without a strategy, which would cost lives in real battle. While Rayon reminds the kids not to forget the experience of the day, Kane stands far away and watches Rayon silently. As Rayon instructs the others that they're going to be camping in the forest because it's getting late and asks them to divide into teams to build the campsite and keep watch, Kane realizes that Rayon is much more competent than he expected. Kane had thought that the 5th training ground was arrogant, but it's clear that he was the one that was arrogant. Eventually, he steps toward Rayon with a handshake, thanking him for the lesson, especially helping him realize that he can't let down his guard until the very end, and learning to prepare another plan in case of failure. Because he had believed that they were definitely going to win based on the understanding they had from rumors about the 5th training ground, he didn't pay attention to his commands or the private duel. He admits that his sense of superior strength was just arrogance, and he's learned a lot. His words bring a smile to Rayon's face, especially because it seems Kane has more decent character compared to other members of the main family he's met so far. The two of them soon shake hands, and Kane promises to support the 5th training ground as promised. Some days later, about 2 weeks after they left their respective training centers, the trainees finally reach Cebu Village. Cebu Village is a small village where a small number of residents make their living by farming without any special products or tourist spots. This mission isn't anything special and is periodically carried out because monsters come to the village from time to time. But for some reason, Rayon seems to be sensing an eerie gaze behind them for some time now. It doesn't feel like an instructor secretly following them, but it feels like a frightening sensation, like they're trying to analyze their strengths. He decides that the best move will be to watch the situation unfold while deceiving their secret opponent, since it has come to this. Suddenly, Rayon asks Warren to act as the top trainee and issues orders to the team on this mission. The odd request confuses Warren, and Rayon explains that he would like the others to play integral parts of the new mission because only he and Runan got to fight the bandits in the Snow Tiger mission. To leverage his pride, he reminds him about how he had said he would stand ahead of him on the first day of their official training and asks him to prove his words, so Warren agrees to show how much he's improved since the last time. Shortly after, they announce to everyone else that Warren is the new leader. Marta doesn't seem so eager, so Rayon informs her that he'll explain why he's doing this later, but he asks her to follow Warren's orders in the meantime. Oddly, she says he doesn't need to make a special request for her to follow since she had promised to follow him as long as there are results. When he's alone, Rayon confirms that Wrath also senses the people that are watching them secretly. As usual, Wrath taunts him by saying he'd have asked him to commit seppuku if he didn't notice the people after consuming his trait. Rayon asks him for the number of the intruders as well as their location, and Wrath refuses to tell him the person's location, but Rayon figures out that it's just one person from listening to him. Wrath is shocked that he could pick that out, and he doesn't realize that he had mistakenly used the pronoun his while talking. When Wrath realizes he's been played, he starts to curse and rant. To Rayon, this still doesn't guarantee that there's just one person, because the one person observing them could have many companions with him, and the eerie feeling doesn't allow him to settle down. For some reason, he gets the feeling that this mission won't be easy. Meanwhile, the spy from the sect that had been watching the team goes to report to his boss that he saw kids from Sieghart House, although his boss doesn't think they're a big deal since they're related to one of the 6 lords. The scout explains that they seem to be trainees instead of regular swordsmen, and they're probably on their second mission considering the fact that their instructors are not nearby. He also claims that he was undetected, and his boss agrees that there's no way the mere trainees would detect him. He also wonders why House Sieghart would dispatch trainees after they had taken care of some of the orcs, and his boss figures that the villagers must have signaled for reinforcement after some orcs came again, especially because they've wasted too much time in finding the magic stone they came here to look for. Apparently, this secret sect came here to search the entire mountain for a magic stone, and since they haven't found it, the only place left to check seems to be the village. When the scout asks whether to attack the village right away, his boss tells him to hold on for a while. Although the scout feels this is the perfect opportunity to slay the new Sieghart sprouts, his boss feels killing them is an easy task, but it might end up letting the Sieghart house know about the magic stone's existence, which would result in their loss if they lose the bigger fish for a momentary gain. The boss orders him to just give them some monsters to make them believe they've accomplished their mission and then leave. Suddenly, the boss puts on an orc helmet and transforms into an actual orc. He informs his subordinate that they'll attack and wipe out the entire village after the trainees leave. Meanwhile, the trainees reach the village and are given a place to lodge. While they're eating, Rayon looks at Warren and is glad that he's able to handle the responsibility quite well, even though he was worried at the beginning. One particularly impressive part is how he didn't act arrogantly while mentioning the Sieghart name with the villagers, and how he reassured the village chief and villagers while prioritizing the mission. However, he realizes that the major thing to worry about right now isn't Warren because he and the others can easily take care of the monsters without much help, but the mysterious gaze from near the village. For some reason, it seemed to have disappeared into the mountain as soon as they entered the village. He wonders if this is a secret trial prepared by the house, or a plot by someone else entirely. Regardless, he'd have to wait until the next day to find out. Earlier that day, the group found a different footprint in the mountains that hints that there are monsters there. The village chief explains that monsters usually appear at this time of the year, but their numbers have increased 3 times this year, and are too much for them to deal with. Apparently, they've seen at least 100 of them, and there should be even more than 200 of them that haven't shown up yet. Because the kids aren't accustomed to the layout of the mountains, the chief promises to prepare the fastest man in the village to guide them into the mountain before they leave the next morning. The next morning, a guy named Kanbar, the Cebu mountain guide, leads the trainees into the mountains. For some reason, he doesn't seem to be enjoying his time helping the Sieghart extermination squad like the chief asked him to do. Rayon notices his uneasiness and assures him that they'll ensure he returns without the slightest injury. Meanwhile, Warren informs the others that orcs are stronger overall than the other monsters, but goblins and kobolds use dirty tricks like poison. Because of this, they can't let their guard down, because even a small injury from those monsters can lead to their demise. Warren also leads the 6th training ground to form a barrier so they can take out the monsters that slip out, and Keen promptly obeys. They soon begin the extermination and rush in to show the monsters the power of Sieghart. As they rush onwards with a shout, Wrath rants about how their trainees are a bunch of idiots because they just shouted to reveal their location after preparing a surprise attack the whole time. Rayon, on the other hand, feels like they're trying to get rid of the tension of their first battle by shouting together, so it's understandable. Wrath doesn't know why Rayon is speaking from a sage perspective, especially when this should also be his first monster extermination mission, but he doesn't seem to be nervous at all. To him, Rayon looks like a seasoned warrior who has experienced hundreds of battles. Shortly after that, the trainees run into several orcs and the killing begins. As Marta is about to charge head-on, Warren reminds them to take care of the goblins and kobolds first, and attack the orcs afterward. Somehow, 2 orcs manage to breach the circle that the 6th training group formed, and they head towards Rayon and Kanbar, who is scared as heck. As he cries that he shouldn't have come out with them, Rayon calmly dashes past the first orc and slices its neck before it can tell. While the other one is spilling his green blood, he dashes past the second orc before it can raise its blade and slits its throat too. The two orc corpses soon collide by their sides, while a frantic Kanbar, who had also collapsed, wonders what suddenly happened to them. Luckily, Kanbar doesn't hurt at all, which gladdens Rayon. Suddenly, Rayon asks him if there's anything like an ancient legend concerning the mountain, probably about an amazing treasure or monster. Kanbar confirms that there is one legend from a few hundred years ago that says the king of goblins from the west fought against the Night Order on this mountain. According to the story, the Goblin King's ring is still buried on the mountain. That piece of information startles Rayon and finally helps him understand the eerie gaze he'd felt yesterday, and he's still feeling right now. It's connected to a sect called Eden. They are one of the pillars of the continent's darkness, the Five Demons. They are a group of lunatics that compete for first in terms of madness. Eden's goal is restoration, and they believe that the era when the monsters ruled the world 1,000 years ago was paradise, so they are trying to revive the monster god, hoping to return to that period of time. If that was all they had, they would have been exterminated as a simple band of lunatics. However, the sect can control monsters like tamers. They can also use the abilities of monsters with their human bodies, and their powerful might is a threat even to Sieghart. Their strange power is a secret that even the prestigious houses on the continent don't know about. However, Rayon knows about that method because of the time he spent with Darius Robert. During his time as an assassin, he clashed against Eden while carrying out a mission from Darius, and every single shadow that joined the battle with him perished, leaving him as the only survivor. The odd thing was that Darius knew from the beginning that Eden used magic stones, and it's strange that despite being one of the 6 lords, he doesn't disclose that fact to the other lords of the houses. When Wrath senses a deep sense of wrath suddenly surge inside Rayon, he appears again and asks him what he's thinking, calling him a bastard as usual. Rayon soon realizes that his emotions have become unsettled again because he was thinking about Darius, so he decides to calm down and focus on what's right in front of him: Eden. According to Kanbar's story, Eden's objective is most likely to find the Goblin King's magic stone, which was left behind after the Goblin King died in the forest hundreds of years ago. They're after the magic stone because it contains a huge amount of mana. If they're truly dealing with Eden, he realizes they must have dispatched the monsters to make them believe that they've succeeded in their mission, to make them leave so they don't pose a hindrance to their search for the magic stone. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Warren spots a huge orc that he believes to be the boss, so he proceeds to finish him with one strike. Unexpectedly, Marta stubbornly destroys the monster before he does. Realizing that the boss is dead, Warren signals to the others to clear out the rest of the small fries, which excites the team. On the other side, Raon asks Kanbar if a gem or a treasure ever appeared on the mountain after the Goblin King's death. So, Kanbar tells him about an event that occurred when he was a child, when the village chief went to the mountain one day and mined a red gem from the summit. When Raon probes further to know the location of the gem, Kanbar says that people don't know about it, but he's fairly certain that it's buried under the floor of the village chief's home. Oddly, the village became warmer after the gem was brought in. That information scares Raon because the situation seems to be far more serious than he thought. If Eden doesn't manage to find the magic stone after searching the mountain, Cebu village will be completely destroyed. On the battlefield, the trainees clear out all the orcs and complete their extermination assignment. After they're done, the chief thanks them for helping out their village and commends that their skills are befitting of the name of Sieghart. Meanwhile, Raon watches the proceedings silently. Suddenly, Marta asks him if this is the goal he wanted to achieve, declaring that she still doesn't know why he switched roles with Warren. He informs her that he's not certain, but will inform her when the time is right. Regardless, she promises to follow his instructions until the end of the mission. Shortly after, Runan finds him on his own, and she suspects that he's worried about something because he doesn't look like he's in a good mood. He tries to cover it up and suggests that they should head to the banquet the village chief is throwing. What's actually on his mind is how Eden won't take action until they leave the village, and will send monsters right after they leave. The next day, outside Cebu village, the trainees take their leave, and Warren reminisces over the great things that had happened on the mission. So far, they were able to exterminate all the monsters on Cebu Mountain with no fatalities, and only a few people ending up with small injuries. To him, they were able to achieve their first mission perfectly, and that must be why Rayon isn't asking him to give the commander position back. There was no gap at all in his commands. He's still not certain what Rayon is trying to confirm, but he's glad that he now recognizes that his command is now as good as Rayon's. Warren proudly leads the trainees onward, but while on the way, Rayon senses something odd, so he asks everyone to stop. The trainees start to murmur about how it's too early to camp, and they wonder what's going on. Suddenly, Rayon announces to them that the real mission begins now. This comes as a surprise to Warren and Keen because it doesn't make any sense since they've exterminated the orcs and even cleaned up the aftermath. Rayon explains to them that their mission is to exterminate the monsters and protect the village, and even though they've done the first part, someone was observing them until a moment ago. Apparently, they were observing them until an hour ago, when they disappeared. They could brush it off as an instructor, but they had an aura of hostility around them, and it was not something that could come from an instructor. He recounts that he noticed the presence before they arrived at the village, and it disappeared toward the village once they got away from it by half a day. It comes as a surprise to Warren and Marta that they were being watched before they arrived at the village, and Rayon spells it out that it was precisely from the moment they reached the hill near the village. They quickly figure out that the reason he gave the commander position to Warren was to hide his presence in order to better understand the enemy. Rayon's sharp thinking astounds Keen because his senses and plans are better than those of some of their instructors. He's surprised that even he couldn't detect that someone was observing them. A reality check hits Warren, who asks to clarify why he was given the commander position. Oddly, Rayon agrees to having given him the position because he trusts him and believes that he would be able to lead the trainees even better than he could, thereby posing as the ideal top trainee and making the enemies believe that, so they don't notice his existence. Rayon commends that he was truly worthy of the Sieghart name and suggests that they nominate him as the vice top trainee after they return. This comes as a blow to Warren, who had thought that he was standing on equal ground as Rayon, only to find out that he was simply used as a decoy to distract the enemies. Rayon announces that it's impossible for monsters to cooperate with other races, and the orcs and goblins were cooperating during the mission, which implies that the enemies are using some method to control the monsters. Their first mission is to protect the village since there are still enemies threatening the village. They all proceed to return to Cebu village, but this time quietly, so that no one will notice them. Rayon suggests that they just mind their steps since they didn't carry any tools to disguise themselves. Oddly, it turns out that Dorian had carried around several disguise tools. It's surprising that he carried about 40 disguise tools just in case, and it goes to show how frightened the kid can get. While they disguise themselves, Rayon orders Crane to run to the nearby branch to inform them about their current situation. Before they leave, Rayon reminds the trainees to obey his orders unconditionally from that moment onwards without refusing anything. 5 hours later, near Cebu Mountain, at Eden's temporary hideout, the scout reports that the trainees have left the village and they decide to begin the plan called Restoration. The boss transforms into a huge orc after putting on his helmet again, and several other orcs show up by his side. He instructs them to wipe out all the villagers, not let a single one of them live. The orcs rush down the mountain and onto the village, while Rayon and Warren watch them from above. Warren is surprised that there are more orcs, as Rayon had said, and he passionately plans to finish them all off this time. Before he can act, Rayon reminds him that it's not time to act yet because someone is watching them, and he knows it's a human being, but the enemy's actual identity is yet to be revealed. The staggering number of orcs and their weapons unsettle Warren, though, and he becomes worried that there will be great casualties in the village if they don't act now. Meanwhile, Rayon explains that they'll be annihilated and end up defeated if they act too early. Warren still tries to do something because of the sheer number of orcs, but Rayon insists that it's not yet time. Our boy soon informs the others that they need to be more careful since they're up against Eden. Luckily, the others seem to recognize the 5-demon sect known as Eden. Although Rayon isn't still sure if they're really up against Eden, he knows that the ability to control monsters could either mean that folks from the Eden sect are here or a Lord rank monster has appeared, and that's why they need to act carefully. Meanwhile, Warren acknowledges the strength of Eden and how reasonable Rayon's orders are, but he can't just accept the fact that they have to let half of the villagers die without doing anything. He challenges Rayon's plan of just hiding away while the villagers are being attacked, expressing that he had once acknowledged him as someone befitting of the Sieghart name more than him, but he just can't accept that they have to sit on their hands. To him, wielding their sword for the sake of the villagers is the way of a true swordsman of Sieghart. He soon jumps down the mountain towards the village and informs the others that they don't have to follow him anymore unless they consider themselves true swordsmen of Sieghart. As Rayon is still watching him stubbornly leave, Runan follows him. The other trainees feel Warren is right because it would be embarrassing for Sieghart to be afraid of the 5 demons, so they decide to follow after them to quickly protect the village and the villagers. Kine also leads the 6th training ground after them to help the 5th training ground and attack Eden's demons. After they leave, a few other trainees remain with Rayon. The truth is that Rayon had expected this to happen, judging from what he's seen so far. Because he knows they won't be able to stay quiet in the face of injustice, he had sent an aura message to Runan in advance, telling her to follow them. The only good part is that Warren and Keen are there, so the trainees should be able to last for a while against Eden. The only part that Rayon didn't expect is that Marta would wait behind because she's always the first to head out in such situations. When he asks her, she reminds him that she had promised to fully follow his instructions. Her words bring a smile across his face, and he informs the rest of them that they'll also be going into the village. However, they're going to be hiding their presence as much as possible, especially because Eden would have additional troops that won't be joining the battle on the front lines. For some reason, Raon can sense a strong bloodlust in the middle of the mountain that's not heading towards the village. The other trainees can deal with the other enemies, but it will end badly if they have a frontal clash with this mysterious enemy. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Warren leads the others not to take the orcs head-on, but to deflect their attacks first and respond with a counterattack. He also suggests that 2 people attack at once if it's difficult for one person to do so. Their plan is to stop the orcs right there before they reach the village. He soon notices that these monsters are a lot more ferocious and powerful than the orcs they fought the day before, but protecting the village won't be difficult if this is all they have. The only issue is that, knowing Eden, this cannot be all they have, and that makes him wonder if Raon was right after all. To counter anything hidden and unexpected, he tells the others to watch out for hidden attacks from above and the bushes where they can hide. While they're fighting, a troop known as Eden's Green Demon Troop emerges behind them, and it's clear they're from Eden because of their goblin masks and helmets. Just from a glance, Warren can detect that there are more than 40 of them. To respond to the threat, he orders Keen to keep fighting the orcs, heading to the village with the orcs, while Runan freezes the feet of the orcs and the green demons with her frost, and he'll deal with the green demons. Runan quickly affirms her orders and proceeds to launch an attack at the monsters to freeze them all using her frost aura. One strike of the frost aura freezes a nearby orc solid, so Warren goes in for the kill using his star-connecting sword skill. With a quick dash, he leaps towards the orcs and slashes their throats, also employing a skill called the Sword of Autumn Wind. Unknown to him, there's a member of the Eden Green Demon group on a nearby tree behind him. They soon shoot a myriad of poisoned needles at the trainees, so Warren tells them to block them with their aura, or use their footwork to dodge. Soon after, they also realize that the enemies have spread poison fog on the ground, which makes the trainees start to gag. The poison is more powerful than the ones used by the monsters, so Warren quickly alerts them to cover their mouths. The trainees suddenly begin to collapse and are unable to wield their swords, and even Warren starts to lose balance because he was also poisoned in the split second before they realized. His body soon begins to stiffen, and Runan also starts to become lightheaded. But the number of monsters and green demons does not decrease at all. At this rate, their annihilation is unavoidable. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurs right in the middle of the field. After the smoke clears, it turns out that the destructive power came from Marta. Behind her are the rest of the trainees who stayed with Raon, and she leads them to take out the trash, referring to Eden, and not let a single one escape. The oppressed trainees are glad to see Marta and the second team coming, and they should be, because they would have collapsed from the poison in the air if Marta hadn't dispelled it with the explosion she just triggered. They soon take courage to continue the fight. Although Raon is still nowhere to be seen, it looks like the tide has been reversed, and they can win at this rate. Meanwhile, the green demons are shocked that ordinary trainees can be so strong, so they decide to run away so they don't get killed. Before they can escape, their boss shows up and asks them if they're planning to escape from battle. The towering image of the new guy astounds everyone on the battlefield because his aura is on a whole different level compared to the green demons, and it can speak human language. Judging from the fighter's helmet he's wearing, it's clear that he's the Eden Green War Demon. Even though his rank is low, he's one of Eden's executives, and it's a mystery why he would be in such a place. The Green War Demon recalls that the report stated that they had left, and he wonders if they had returned after they noticed their ambush, which would be pretty good for ordinary trainees. Judging from their levels, he figures that Marta was the one who noticed and counsels that they should have left quietly to avoid losing their lives. Because they didn't know their place, he decides to kill them all. With a single strike, the demon knocks Warren, Marta, and Runan. The sudden turn of events surprises the rest of the trainees, and they start to look for Kane to help, but realize he's busy fighting the orcs near the wooden barricade. Raon is also nowhere to be found, and they figure he must have escaped after seeing the Green War Demon. When Marta struggles to get back up, the Green War Demon commends her as the most decent one among the trash, especially since she had managed to notice their presence. Regardless, he considers her a vermin, with no ability, strength, or willpower, who's about to be trampled to death. He lifts his sword to kill them all, and Raon suddenly bursts out of the woods from behind him, covered in a glorious blaze of golden flames. As he jumps towards his neck, the war monster notices the advancing threat and quickly moves, but Raon manages to cut his hand to the ground using the 10,000 Flames Cultivation First Flame Vortex. The attack amuses the demon, who had intentionally moved towards him to avoid the neck strike. The fact that he missed the neck pisses off Raon, but he has an assassination plan up his sleeves.